He didn't even have the decency to call. Amara Brooks had been sitting at that table for 73 minutes. She knew the exact number because she had checked her phone 11 times, each check a small humiliation she couldn't stop herself from repeating. The restaurant was called Sohwa, which someone at her office had told her meant small flower, and everything about it was designed to make a person feel like they were somewhere that mattered. Low amber lighting, white linen napkins folded into shapes she couldn't identify. The soft sound of a piano being played by someone in the back corner who clearly had more training than she would ever be able to afford for Malcolm. She had worn the green dress, the one she had not worn since Chicago, since before the divorce, since before the move to Seoul that was supposed to be a fresh start and had mostly just been exhausting. She had ironed it herself that afternoon while Malcolm sat at the kitchen table drawing robots with felt-tip markers, asking her why she was getting dressed up. And she had told him she was having dinner with a work colleague because 8-year-old boys do not need to know their mother is trying, failing, and trying again. The man she was supposed to meet was named Daniel Cho, a friend of a friend, a corporate consultant, mid-40s, recently divorced, supposedly very kind. He had texted her at 6:53, 7 minutes before their reservation, to say he was running late, traffic was terrible, he would be there soon. She had replied with a single okay and had not heard from him again. 73 minutes. She was not crying. She wanted that to be clear, to herself if to no one else. She was not the kind of woman who cried in restaurants. She had cried exactly twice in the past 4 years. Once at a hospital in Atlanta, when they told her Malcolm had a fever that had nothing to do with cancer, just a fever, and once in a parking garage in Seoul when her car wouldn't start and she had a presentation in 40 minutes. And she realized she had not spoken to another adult in 6 days. Those were acceptable reasons to cry. A man who didn't show up was not an acceptable reason to cry. Men didn't show up. That was a fact she had long since finished being surprised by. What she had not finished being surprised by was how much it still cost her. Not the man, she barely knew him, but the effort, the green dress, the ironed hair, the careful application of lipstick in the bathroom mirror while Malcolm knocked on the door asking where his blue marker was. The 45 minutes she had spent constructing the small architecture of hope around an evening that had now fully collapsed. She ordered a glass of water and then, because the waiter looked at her with an expression that wasn't quite pity but was close enough to make her jaw tighten, she ordered a glass of wine as well. She drank the wine slowly and looked at the other tables and gave herself a firm internal instruction to stop looking at the other tables, because every single one of them contained people who had not been stood up. She was about to ask for the check when the man at the table across the room stood up. Kang Jae-hyun had not wanted to be here either. He had been very clear about that when Park Sung-jin, his head of security, had laid out the plan 3 days ago in the back office of a building in Gangnam that officially housed an investment consulting firm. The logic was straightforward, which was the kind of logic Jae-hyun had learned to be suspicious of. He needed to be visible in a public setting on Tuesday evening. There was a scheduled meeting of rival families happening in Itaewon, a meeting he was not supposed to know about, and which his absence from an innocuous location could complicate. A dinner reservation at Sohwa, one of the most photographed restaurants in the city, with a woman who believed she was on a genuine blind date, would create exactly the documentation his team needed. The woman, her name in the file was Na Eun-ji, 38, a bank manager from Mapogu, a cousin of someone who owed a favor to someone who owed a favor to Park, had been briefed that this was a professional networking dinner arranged through mutual contacts. She believed it was a real date. Jae-hyun had not asked how Park managed that part. He rarely asked about the parts he didn't want to know. What he had not expected was for Na Eun-ji to call Park at 6:45 and cancel because her mother had fallen at home and needed to go to the emergency room. Park had told him this via earpiece as Jae-hyun's car was already pulling up outside the restaurant. 2 of his men were already inside. The reservation was in his name, not his real name, but a name that could be traced to a clean identity if anyone checked, which was the kind of elaborate mundane precaution his life required. He could not simply leave. He was already visible. The documentation had to happen. So he went inside, sat down at the table that had been reserved, ordered water, and began the work of performing the version of himself that existed in public. A composed, moderately successful businessman, early 40s, no particular reason to look twice at, no reason to remember. He was very good at this. He had been doing it since he was 26 years old, when his father died and left him an empire he had never wanted and could not refuse. He sat and he watched the room because watching rooms was something he could not stop doing, and that was how he first noticed the woman in the green dress at the table near the far window. She was checking her phone. He watched her do it 3 times in the space of 10 minutes, each time with a slight adjustment of her expression that told him she was receiving no answer she wanted. She was a black woman, American, he thought, from something in her posture, her clothes, not quite soul in its aesthetic choices. And she was sitting alone at a table set for two with the particular stillness of someone who has decided that stillness is the only remaining form of dignity available. He recognized that stillness. He had worn it at every table, in every room, for the better part of 2 decades. He looked away. He checked the message from Park on his secondary phone. The Irawan meeting was proceeding, everything was under surveillance, his presence here for another 40 minutes was sufficient. He ordered a small dish from the menu without reading it. He looked at the room again. The woman had ordered wine. She was drinking it in the careful way that meant she was not a regular drinker or was trying very hard not to finish it too fast. The table beside her was loud with a couple celebrating something, and the couple on her other side was sharing a dessert, and she was in the exact center of all that happiness, with the specific expression of someone who has mastered not showing how much something costs them. Jae-hyun had a rule. He had many rules, and most of them existed because breaking them got people killed. But this particular rule was simpler. He did not involve civilians in his life. He did not make personal connections that could be weaponized. He did not offer his presence to people who had not earned the right to know what his presence actually meant. It was not cruelty. It was arithmetic. The closer someone got to him, the more danger they absorbed without knowing it. He had watched his father make that mistake twice. He had spent his adult life not making it. He looked at the woman in the green dress. He thought, she's been waiting over an hour. He thought, she's about to leave and she'll spend the drive home telling herself this doesn't matter. He thought, I know exactly what that feels like. He stood up before he had made a decision. That was the part he could not explain later, even to himself. That his body had moved while his mind was still assembling reasons not to. He crossed the restaurant with the economy of movement that was natural to him, the kind of stride that parted rooms without demanding attention, and he stopped at the edge of her table and waited until she looked up. She looked up slowly. She had clearly decided to be done with surprises this evening. Your blind date didn't show up either, he said quietly. She stared at him for a moment. Excuse me? It's not a line, he said. The woman I was supposed to meet had a family emergency. I've been sitting alone across the room for 40 minutes. He paused. I thought perhaps we could waste the rest of the evening in company rather than separately. She looked at him for a long moment. He watched her assess him, not with the particular alertness of someone afraid, but with the frank, efficient appraisal of a woman who has made a science of reading rooms because the alternative is being caught off guard. That is almost certainly a line, she said. It is also true. She looked at the empty table across the room. She looked back at him. You were watching me. I was watching the room. You were in the room. Something shifted in her expression. Not softening exactly, but a recalculation. She picked up her wine glass, drank a small sip, and set it back down. Amara, she said. Amara Brooks. Kang Jae-hyun, he said. You can sit with the formal or the informal. Most Koreans I know go straight to informal. I'll sit with whatever doesn't make me sound like I'm mispronouncing it. Jae-hyun is fine, he said. May I sit down? She gestured at the chair across from her with the kind of generosity that comes from having already decided the evening cannot get worse. He sat. The first 15 minutes were the most uncomfortable. This was not unusual when two strangers sit across from each other with nothing established between them except proximity and mutual failure. Amara kept her hands around her wine glass. Jae-hyun ordered water and a dish he also did not look at and directed the waiter to clear the original place setting, which meant removing the little folded centerpiece card with the name of the man who had not come, which she appreciated more than she said. She asked him what he did. He said he managed investments and handled a few business interests he found difficult to describe precisely. She watched him deliver this with a smoothness that meant it was either completely true or completely practiced, and she had met enough people in both categories to know that the distinction was sometimes impossible. She told him she worked in logistics coordination for a Korean-American trade firm, which was both accurate and deeply undramatic. He asked what that involved. She explained it briefly and watched him actually listen, which was rarer than it should have been. "How long have you been in Seoul?" he asked. 2.5 years, she said. "Almost 3. You're not sure?" "I'm sure. I'm just still surprised by it when I say it out loud." She turned her wine glass once. "My son was 5.5 when we came. It felt like a temporary thing that became permanent without anyone officially announcing it." He was quiet for a moment. "How old is he now?" 8. She paused. "He speaks better Korean than I do, which he brings up at every available opportunity." Something moved across Jae-hyun's face. Not quite a smile, but a near relative of one. "What's his name?" "Malcolm." "Good name." "He chose it himself," she said. "Which isn't true, but he believes it is, so we maintain the fiction." This time, the near smile clarified into the actual thing, brief and unguarded, and Amara noticed that it changed his face significantly. He was handsome in the composed, slightly severe way that some men were, the kind of handsomeness that looked built rather than given, but the smile made him look briefly like someone who had not recently decided everything about the evening in advance. She decided she would stay for one more glass of wine. The second glass arrived without her asking for it. She was about to say she hadn't ordered it when the waiter said quietly that it was complimentary. She suspected this was not the restaurant's standard policy and looked at Jae-hyun, who was looking at the far wall with the total innocence of a man who had arranged exactly nothing. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Right." She picked up the glass. "Okay." They fell into something easier after that. The conversation moved across surfaces before dropping into anything real. Seoul in autumn, the specific aggravation of navigating a city in a second language. The way that living abroad taught you things about your home country you couldn't have learned any other way. He had lived briefly in London and longer in Tokyo. She asked what Tokyo was like, and he described it in 4 sentences that were more precise and felt than anything she'd heard in the travel articles she'd read before coming to Asia. She asked how he had ended up in criminal. She stopped, caught herself, in consulting. She had been about to say criminal consulting, which made no sense and which she attributed to her second glass of wine, and the particular cognitive interference of sitting across from a man who moved like someone for whom the word danger was a technical term rather than an abstraction. "I inherited a family business," he said, "not in the way that implies warmth." A pause. "My father died when I was 26. The business was already operational. Walking away wasn't a realistic option." She heard something in this that she didn't quite have the context to decode. "Do you ever wish you had walked away?" He looked at her directly. It was the kind of look she associated with people who were deciding how much of something to hand over. "Yes," he said. "Frequently." She nodded. She didn't push it. She understood the geography of things people couldn't say in public places to people they'd known for 40 minutes. And she understood that the not pushing was sometimes the thing that made people feel safest. "Malcolm's father," she said, because the conversation had arrived at that shore whether she intended it or not. We were married for 4 years. He was a good person at the beginning, or I thought he was, which is maybe the same thing in the beginning. He left when Malcolm was 2. She paused. He didn't leave dramatically. He just became increasingly absent until the absence became official. I sometimes think that's worse. No clear moment to point at. Jae-hyun said nothing immediately. She noticed that he didn't immediately offer the standard reassurances, that it wasn't her fault, that she deserved better, the vocabulary of consolation that people deployed to fill silences they didn't know how to sit in. He just received what she had said and held it for a moment. "There's kind of loneliness," he said finally, "that looks like a completely normal life from the outside." She set down her glass. She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what it is." The piano in the back corner shifted registers. The restaurant moved around them in its expensive orchestration. Amara became aware that the couple to her left had left at some point without her noticing, and the celebration table to her right had quieted, and the evening had contracted to the dimensions of this particular table and this particular conversation with a man she had not planned to meet and could not fully place. She thought about Malcolm at home with the neighbor's daughter watching him, drawing his robots, asking questions about everything, filling the apartment with noise that was also a kind of love. She thought about the green dress she had ironed. She thought about the 73 minutes. None of it felt like the beginning of anything. She was a practical woman and had trained herself out of that kind of thinking. But something had shifted in the room's texture, in the weight of the hour, and she was aware of it the way you were aware of weather changing before you could see it. Jae-hyun was aware of it too. He knew because he recognized the discomfort, the particular friction of feeling something you have decided in advance not to feel. He had a rule. He looked at her across the white linen table. He had several rules. The waiter came and asked if they would like to see the dessert menu. Without consulting each other, without hesitation, both of them said yes. He drove her home. This was not something he had planned, and was not something his security detail had planned for, which meant Park Sung-jin spent the 15-minute drive sending increasingly controlled text messages to the secondary phone that Jae-hyun had the specific satisfaction of leaving unread. She had not asked him to drive her. He had simply said, as they stood outside Sowa in the autumn air, that he was going in the direction of Mapo-gu, a guess based on something she'd mentioned, and that it would be impractical to call a car for a short distance. She had looked at him with the expression of a woman who had already used up her diplomatic energy for the evening and said, "All right," with the inflection that meant she was agreeing to the ride and not to any larger implication. His car was a dark gray sedan, clean, nothing ostentatious, one of 3 vehicles he used for civilian movement, chosen specifically for its anonymity. The driver, one of his men, received his instructions without a word and adjusted the route without the GPS making a sound. Amara sat in the back seat and looked out the window. Seoul at night had a particular quality. All that blazing commercial light pressed against the darkness of the Han River and the mountains, the old city and the relentlessly new city arguing with each other in neon and stone. She had never stopped finding it beautiful in a way that also exhausted her. "Can I ask you something?" she said, still looking at the window. "You can ask." "What was she like? The woman you were supposed to meet tonight?" He considered this. "I don't know. I never met her." She turned from the window. "You agreed to a blind date with someone you knew nothing about?" "I was doing a favor for someone," he said. He paused. "It was more obligation than choice." "That's a sad reason for a dinner." "Most reasons are, eventually." She looked at him. He was watching the city through the opposite window, and in profile his face had the particular quality of someone who had decided long ago that the world did not require his warmth to function. She did not feel afraid of him. She noticed this, because it was the kind of thing worth noticing, the absence of an instinct she generally trusted. What she felt was the specific unease of sitting very close to someone who was not what they appeared to be, and not being sure whether that was a warning or simply the ordinary mystery of any person you had known for 3 hours. "Thank you," she said, "for not letting me sit there all night." He turned from the window. "You would have left on your own." "I know, but still." The car slowed. They had reached her building without her giving the address, which she noticed but was too tired to process fully. She would think about it later, in the way she placed certain questions in a drawer for later, the drawer that was currently containing about 6 months of things she'd been meaning to examine. "Good night, Jae-hyun," she said. She said his name carefully, the way she said Korean names she was still calibrating. "Good night, Amara." She was at the lobby door when she heard the car pause before moving. She did not turn around. She went inside, nodded at the night security man, rode the elevator to the 8th floor, and stood outside her apartment door for a moment with her keys in her hand. Inside, she could hear the television. Malcolm had talked the neighbor's daughter into staying past his bedtime again. She unlocked the door. She went inside. She checked on her son, who was asleep with his shoes still on and a blue marker uncapped beside his hand, and she sat on the edge of his bed for a moment in the dark and listened to him breathe. She did not think about the evening. She thought about his scholarship applications. 3 of them, all outstanding, all pending, all dependent on money she did not currently have, and competitions that were fiercer than she had expected when she filled out the first form. She thought about how talented he was, and how talent was not the same as opportunity, and how much of her life had been spent learning and relearning that particular equation. Then she went to bed. She left the green dress on the chair. In the back of a dark gray sedan crossing back through Seoul, Kang Jae-hyun sat with his secondary phone in his hand and 12 unread messages from Park Sung-jin. He read them in order. The Itaewon meeting had concluded. Two of the rival families had made preliminary agreements. The third had not. There were items requiring his attention in the morning. He put the phone in his jacket pocket. He thought about the 8-year-old who spoke better Korean than his mother. He thought about scholarship applications, which crossed his desk sometimes in the mornings when Park presented the charitable foundation's weekly summaries. The anonymous giving operation that laundered not money, but the particular guilt of men who had built their wealth on methods they could not acknowledge publicly. He thought, Malcolm Brooks, Mapogu, 8 years old. He thought, I can find out. He did not examine why he wanted to. Examination was a skill he had deployed selectively and strategically for his entire adult life. And he had learned that some impulses dissolved under scrutiny and others hardened into something he'd regret not acting on. He took out his primary phone. He sent a single text to the foundation director, a name, an age, a district of Seoul, a request for any matching scholarship applications to be flagged for his personal review. Then he put that phone away too and watched the city pass outside the window and tried without success to locate the feeling he was looking for. It was not ambition, it was not strategy. It was something much older than either of those things, and much more dangerous, and he had not felt it in long enough that it took him almost the full drive home to recognize it. Something that felt, uncomfortably and unmistakably, like wanting to know what happened next. The message came at 6:14 in the morning. Jae-hyun was already awake. He was always already awake at 6:14 in the morning, had been for the better part of 15 years, because the hour between 5 and 6 was the only hour that belonged entirely to him. Before Park's briefings, before the encrypted calls, before the day assembled itself into the specific machinery of violence and negotiation and careful performance that constituted his life. He used the hour to sit at the window of his apartment in Hanam-dong with coffee he made himself, watching the Han River go from black to gray to the particular shade of copper that meant the sun was clearing the eastern ridge. He was on his second cup when the foundation director's reply arrived. One match. Malcolm Brooks, age 8, American national, enrolled at Hangbok Elementary in Mapogu. Application submitted 6 weeks ago for the Minjin Arts Development Scholarship, full academic and material support, renewable for 3 years. Assessment score, exceptional. Status, pending committee review, currently 4th in queue. He read the message twice. Then he set the phone face down on the table beside his coffee cup and looked at the river. 4th in queue meant, realistically, not this cycle. The Minjun Committee reviewed 12 applications per quarter and funded 3. 3 out of 12 with an average assessment time of 8 to 10 weeks meant Malcolm Brooks would be told no in a letter that arrived in approximately 6 to 8 weeks, and would be phrased with the particular institutional gentleness that was designed to be kind and landed like a closed door regardless. Jae-hyun picked up the phone. He typed 3 words to the foundation director. Move him first. He put the phone down. He drank his coffee. He watched the river. He did not ask himself why. He had already decided the night before that he was not going to ask himself why, because he knew the answer, and the answer was not useful information at this stage. What was useful was that the boy was talented, the application was strong, and the foundation existed specifically to fund talented applications that committees were moving slowly on. The logic was clean. The fact that he had met the boy's mother over white linen at a restaurant the night before was not relevant to the logic. He told himself this with the precision of a man who had spent 20 years making decisions that required him to believe his own framing. By 7:15, Park Sung-jin was at his door. Park was 44 years old, had worked for the Kong organization since Jae-hyun's father was still alive, and had the particular quality of a man who had seen enough that very little surprised him and nothing particularly pleased him. He was not large, medium height, medium build, the kind of physical presence that disappeared in crowds, which was the reason he had survived as long as he had in a profession where visibility was often fatal. His face in repose looked like a man working through a math problem. He came in without being invited, which was his habit, set a leather folder on the kitchen counter, and poured himself coffee from the pot Jae-hyun had left on. "The Itaewon meeting," he said. "I read your messages." The Shin family made preliminary agreements with both the Choi and the Baek organizations. I know. That's 3 of the 5 major families in an informal alignment that didn't exist 2 weeks ago. Park opened the folder. We have people who believe this is specifically a response to the Incheon operation being shut down. Jae-hyun turned from the window. I shut down the Incheon operation because it was becoming a liability. I know why you shut it down. Park's voice was level. It was always level. The levelness was the tell. It meant he was choosing words with the care of a man carrying something breakable. The other families don't have our internal reasoning. What they see is a revenue line going dark with no explanation. Then give them an explanation. What explanation would you like me to give them? Jae-hyun said nothing. This was the conversation they had been circling for 3 months, since he had begun the systematic compression of certain operations. The ones that were most visible, most violent, most likely to attract the kind of attention that ended organizations. He had been doing it slowly, methodically, the way you dismantled a building from the inside, removing load-bearing elements in the right sequence so that the structure didn't collapse all at once, so that the people inside had time to find other arrangements. He had told Park it was consolidation strategy. Park had not believed this for longer than approximately 48 hours. You ended the Incheon trafficking route, Park said. His voice had not changed. 3 weeks before that, you declined to renew the Busan agreements. 6 weeks before that, you pulled our people from the Yongsan distribution network. These are not consolidation decisions. He paused. Boss. The word landed differently than it usually did. It usually meant deference. Right now it meant, I am still calling you by the right title, and we both know that requires effort. What are they then? Jae-hyun asked. They look like a man who is trying to get out of something he cannot get out of. The room was quiet. Outside, Seoul was beginning its morning sounds. Traffic building on the bridge, a delivery motorcycle somewhere on the street below, the distant urban percussion of a city that never fully stopped. The Shin family, Jae-hyun said. What are they planning to do with their new informal alignment? Park reached into the folder. He set a single photograph on the counter. They had a second meeting last night, after the formal one, smaller. The Choi second-in-command and 2 of the Baek family's operations men. Our contact got 1 image before they moved inside. Jae-hyun looked at the photograph. Three men outside a building in Itaewon. One of them he recognized, Lee Do-won, the Choi family's enforcer, a man who had once removed a business rival's ability to walk as a professional service and then gone home to dinner. They're talking about territory, Jae-hyun said. They're talking about the territory you've been vacating, Park said, which means they're not waiting for an invitation. They're moving into the spaces you've been clearing. He retrieved the photograph. If you had a plan for what came after the clearing, now would be a good time to tell me what it was. Jae-hyun looked at it. Park met his eyes. I've been with this organization for 19 years, he said. I have done things for this organization that I do not think about at night because I have trained myself not to think about them at night. I am not asking you for a moral accounting. I am asking you whether we are about to be hit, and whether you knew it was coming, and whether the people who work for us, who have families, are going to find out about it from a knock on the door, or from you. It was the longest speech Park had made in Jae-hyun's presence in recent memory. He let it finish. No one is going to be hit, Jae-hyun said. That is not an answer to my question. It's the only answer I have this morning. Jae-hyun picked up his coffee. Set up a meeting with our contact inside the Shin organization. I want to know what they think they know about our positioning. Park watched him for a moment with the math problem expression. Then he picked up the leather folder. There's one more thing, he said. What? Last night. The woman. Jae-hyun said nothing. The scholarship notification arrived on a Thursday. Amara was at her desk when her phone lit up with an email from the Minjin Arts Development Foundation, and she read the first line 3 times before the words fully resolved into meaning. Full scholarship, 3-year renewable, materials allowance, supplementary tutoring access. Effective next academic quarter. Malcolm Brooks, recipient. She sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then she went to the bathroom, ran cold water over her wrist the way her mother had taught her to do when emotion threatened to become ungainly in public, and looked at herself in the mirror above the sink. She had applied to 9 scholarships in the past year. She had developed a practiced relationship with rejection. the kind where you opened the letter standing up and already moving toward the next task, so that the disappointment had nowhere to set down roots. She had done the math too many times. Malcolm's talent was real, but real talent in an 8-year-old required infrastructure that cost money. She redirected from her own needs in increments small enough that she could pretend it wasn't a sacrifice. This was not a rejection. She called Malcolm's school. She asked to speak to his homeroom teacher. She said, "He got it." And when the teacher said she was so happy and had always known, Amara said thank you and ended the call quickly because she was not going to cry in the bathroom of her workplace. She was simply not. She called her sister in Atlanta. The call connected, and immediately Rochelle's voice came through the phone the way it always did, loud and warm and slightly chaotic with her own children in the background. And Amara said, "Malcolm got the arts scholarship." And Rochelle said, "I knew it," so loudly that Amara had to hold the phone away from her ear, and she laughed, which was almost the same as crying but more acceptable in a public bathroom. She did not call anyone else. There was no one else to call, which was a fact she inhabited without drama. She went back to her desk. She finished her work. She picked Malcolm up at 3:15, which she rarely got to do because of her hours, and she walked with him to a park near their building, and she sat on a bench while he ran ahead in the way 8-year-olds ran, with his whole body committed to the direction, not yet burdened by self-consciousness. And she watched him and thought about what 2 billion Korean won of annual anonymous charitable foundation giving actually looked like when it landed in the life of a child who needed it. She didn't know the number. She didn't know anything about the foundation except its name, which was on the letterhead, and that it apparently supported young artists in Seoul, and that somehow her son's application had cleared when 3 previous applications at other foundations had not. She thought, a miracle. She thought, not a miracle, just good timing and a strong application. She thought, don't interrogate it, take it. Malcolm came back at a run, dropped onto the bench beside her, and put his head on her shoulder with the unself-conscious affection of a boy who had not yet learned that affection required effort. "Mom," he said. "Are we celebrating something? You look like we're celebrating something." She put her arm around him. "You got the scholarship." He sat up. He looked at her. He was at the age where his face still changed completely with each emotion, went through 3 or 4 before settling, and she watched surprise give way to confusion, give way to a dawning grin that started at the corners and expanded until it reached his eyes. "The art one?" he said. "The art one." He jumped off the bench and made a sound that wasn't a word. He threw his arms up. He ran in a small circle. Then he came back and stood in front of her with his hands at his sides like he was trying to decide what the appropriate physical response to excellent news was. "Does this mean," he said carefully, "that I get the good brushes?" She laughed. Actually laughed from the chest. "Yes," she said. "You get the good brushes." He sat back down and pressed his face into her shoulder, and she felt him vibrating slightly with contained excitement, in the way that meant he was going to need to draw something within the next 30 minutes, or the energy would turn into talking, which it frequently did. She was looking out across the park when she saw the man. He was standing perhaps 20 meters away on the path near the small fountain. Dark coat, hands in his pockets, looking not at her but at something beyond her, or at nothing in particular, the unfocused gaze of someone who had paused mid-walk to think about something. He was alone. He looked, from this distance, like 100 different men who walked through parks in the late afternoon. It took her 4 seconds to realize she recognized him. Jae-hyun had not planned to be in this park. This was not entirely true. He had known, from the information his team routinely gathered, that Amara Brooks lived 2 blocks from Mapo Hangang Park, and that she picked Malcolm up on the days she left work by 4. He had not planned to be here in the sense that he had not told anyone he was coming, had not included it in any schedule, had driven himself in one of the anonymous sedans without telling his security team where he was going, which was the kind of decision that would cause Park Sung-jin a very specific type of aggravation when he found out. He had been driving. He had taken a route that went past Mapo-gu. He had slowed at the park without making a decision and had found himself parked and then walking and then standing on a path near a fountain, and none of these steps had felt like individual choices so much as a single continuous impulse that he had failed to interrupt at any point. He saw her the moment he registered his own location. She was on a bench with a boy who was now running a small, joyful circle around an empty space of concrete. The boy ran with total physical commitment and then stopped and stood in front of her and said something that made her laugh. He was too far away to hear it, but he could see the laugh from here, the way it opened her face and took the careful composure of it apart. He stood very still. The boy sat back down. Amara looked up. Her eyes found him. He watched her register who he was, watched the surprise pass through her expression and then get replaced by something more complicated. Not alarm, but calculation, the quick internal arithmetic of someone deciding what a coincidence meant. He walked toward her. He could have walked away. That would have been the smarter thing, the thing that preserved the useful distance he was supposed to be maintaining. But he had already failed at the useful distance several times in the past 5 days, and he seemed to have arrived at a point in that failure where the attempt itself was no longer persuasive. She watched him approach with the same frank assessment she'd used in the restaurant. Malcolm looked up from the bench and stared at him with the direct, unfiltered evaluation of a child who had not yet learned to pretend disinterest. "You live near here," Amara said. It was not quite a question. "I was passing through," he said, "in a park." "Parks are public spaces." She looked at him for a moment with an expression that sat somewhere between amusement and wariness. Then she put her hand on Malcolm's shoulder. "Malcolm, this is Mr. Kang. We met at dinner last week." Malcolm looked at him with dark, serious eyes. "Are you her friend?" he said. Jae-hyun looked at him. Something about the directness of the question. No social scaffolding, no polite circumlocution, just the thing itself, landed differently than adult conversation did. "I'm not sure yet," he said honestly. Malcolm considered this answer with what appeared to be genuine intellectual engagement. "That's fair," he said, and looked back down at the sketchbook in his lap. Jae-hyun looked at the sketchbook. Malcolm's hands were moving across it in the fast, committed way of someone who drew constantly, not carefully, but instinctively, the way some people thought out loud. The lines were precise. Even from standing above the bench, the quality was clear. The boy had an eye that was doing real work, not just the enthusiastic imprecision of childhood. "May I?" Jae-hyun asked. Malcolm looked up. He looked at his mother. She gave the slight nod that meant your call. He held up the sketchbook. The page was covered in what appeared to be a city, but not Seoul, not any city Jae-hyun recognized. Buildings with impossible geometries, bridges that went in directions they shouldn't, small figures in the streets below that were rendered in 3 or 4 lines each, and still somehow communicated posture, intention, weather. The whole thing had a quality that was, the word arrived without ceremony, extraordinary. Jae-hyun looked at it for longer than he had intended. He crouched down to the bench level, which was not something he did often. Crouching was a physical position that required trust of your surroundings, and looked at the page more closely. "What city is this?" he said. "Not a city," Malcolm said. "It's a feeling. The feeling you get when you're somewhere and you can't tell if you belong there or not." Jae-hyun was quiet for a moment. He looked at the drawing. He looked at the boy. "How old are you?" he said. 8 3/4. Jae-hyun stood up. He handed the sketchbook back. Malcolm tucked it against his chest and went back to drawing. Jae-hyun looked at Amara. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't fully read, something careful and complicated, and maybe also, beneath the careful, complicated surface, something curious. "We got good news today," she said. "Malcolm received an art scholarship from a foundation here in Seoul." "That's good news," he said. "It's better than good." She paused. "It's the kind of thing that changes what the next few years look like." He held her gaze. He said nothing. She said, "He worked very hard on the application." "I believe that," he said. The silence between them was the kind that knew it was carrying something. He could feel her trying to read the edges of it and deciding she didn't have enough information yet, which was correct. "Sit down," she said. "If you were passing through, the bench is public too." He sat. Not close. There was Malcolm between them and the appropriate distance of people who had not yet established what they were to each other. The autumn air came off the river in slow, cold waves. Malcolm drew. A cyclist went past on the path. Somewhere nearby, a food cart was producing the smell of hoteok. "Tell me something," Amara said. She was looking at the river. "What do you actually do?" "I told you, investments, business interests." "You told me a version of it." She turned to look at him. You told me the version you tell people in restaurants. He looked at her steadily. Most people don't ask for another version. I'm asking. The distance between them felt different than it had in the restaurant, thinner, less mediated. He thought about Park's voice this morning. He thought about the photograph of Lee Do-won. He thought about all the things that surrounded his life like a current you couldn't see until you were already in it. It's complicated, he said. Everything complicated sounds simple when you've had enough time to describe it. You don't have enough time, he said. Not for this one. She studied him. He did not look away. He had learned very young that looking away was the first concession, the one that started a chain, and he had stopped making it before he was 30. Okay, she said. Not satisfied, Chet. He could see that, but filing it, putting it in the drawer. Malcolm looked up from his sketchbook. Mom, can we get hot taeok? She looked at Jae-hyun. Something shifted in her expression, a decision being made at a depth she wasn't going to announce. Are you hungry? She said. He could have said no. He should have said no. He had a meeting at 6 with the lieutenant about the Yongsan restructuring, and Park had already called twice in the last hour that he had been ignoring, and the correct answer to every question this afternoon was the one that put him back in the car and moving toward the life he was supposed to be running. Yes, he said. The hot taeok stand was 3 minutes down the path, and Malcolm sprinted ahead of them without being told, arriving at the cart with the energy of a child for whom speed is a default mode rather than a response to urgency. Amara watched him go and fell into step beside Jae-hyun on the path, and for 30 seconds neither of them said anything, just walked in the amber late afternoon light with the river to their left and the city noise above them, and it was the most normal 30 seconds Jae-hyun had spent in longer than he could readily calculate. He's remarkable, Jae-hyun said. He is, Amara said. I cannot take significant credit for it. He came like that. You raised him alone. I did. That's credit. She was quiet for a moment. He has his father's hands, she said, which is the kind of thing you notice and wish you didn't. The rest is, I don't know whose it is. Maybe his own. They reached the cart. Malcolm was already in conversation with the vendor, pointing at the syrup options with the decisive authority of someone who had opinions and no social hesitation about expressing them. Jae-hyun paid before Amara could, not dramatically, without making a statement of it, just the simple motion of being the person who did that. She looked at him. He met her eyes briefly and looked away, which was the closest he could get to acknowledging the awkwardness of being a man with money in the company of a woman who was careful with hers. Malcolm received his hoteok and immediately burnt his tongue on it, and then kept eating it anyway, with a pragmatic stoicism that made Jae-hyun feel something that took him a full 10 seconds to identify. It was the feeling of being somewhere and not knowing whether you belonged. He knew that feeling. Why? Because they know you've been making decisions unilaterally, and they want to know if you're still the decision maker or whether there's a new conversation to be had. What kind of conversation? The kind, Park said carefully, where they offer to solve your problems in exchange for what you've been clearing. Jae-hyun sat in the parked car with the engine not yet started, watching the park entrance through the windshield. A family came out, a man and woman and a small child between them, the child holding both their hands and being swung. Set the meeting, Jae-hyun said. There's something else. Park paused. We had eyes on the park today. Jae-hyun went very still. You were with the American woman again, Park said. And the boy. Another pause, measured, deliberate. Boss, I need to know if she is a problem. She is not a problem. That isn't what I asked. Outside the windshield, the family with the child moved down the street and disappeared around a corner. Jae-hyun watched the space where they had been. She doesn't know anything, he said. She doesn't need to know anything for her to become one, Park said. The Shin family has eyes too. If they've seen what we've seen in the past 6 days, they already have questions about who she is. And men like Lee Do-won don't ask questions for long before they start looking for answers in places that are hard to come back from. The silence stretched. Jae-hyun's hand on the phone was completely still. I understand, he said. Do you? I said I understand, Park. A beat. The meeting with Shin's contact is at 11 tomorrow. I'll send the location. The line went quiet for a moment and then, Keep your distance from the woman. That is not a suggestion. The call ended. Jae-hyun sat in the car. The autumn light was going orange and flat across the park entrance. He started the engine. He sat with it running and did not move for another full minute. He thought about the scholarship letter arriving in Amar's inbox on a Thursday morning. He thought about Malcolm burning his tongue and eating the hoteok anyway. He thought about an impossible city drawn on sketchbook paper. The feeling of being somewhere and not knowing if you belonged. He thought about Lee Do-won's photograph. He put the car in gear. He had spent 20 years keeping the two worlds apart, the one visible in restaurants and parks, the one that existed in photographs of men outside buildings in Itaewon at midnight. He had managed the distance with precision and sacrifice in rules he had never broken. In the past 6 days, he had broken 4 of them. And the 5th, the one that said the people who couldn't survive contact with his real life had to remain at an uncrossable distance, was cracking down the middle with a sound he could feel in his chest. And he didn't know yet whether the sound was warning or reckoning, and he was no longer entirely sure it mattered which. The meeting with Shin's contact lasted 19 minutes. Jae-hyun knew within the first 4 that it was not a meeting, it was an assessment. The man across the table, or introduced only as Mr. Yu, 50s, the kind of thin that came from discipline rather than deprivation, with hands that were very still on the coffee cup in front of him, was not here to negotiate. He was here to measure. To look at Kang Jae-hyun across a clean table in a coffee shop in Yeouido and determine whether what remained of the man was worth dealing with or simply worth removing. Jae-hyun had been measured before. He had been measured by his father's lieutenants when he was 26 and new to the chair, by rival family heads who thought grief made a man soft, by prosecutors who had sat across from him in rooms that looked like this one and tried to find the seam in his composure. He knew how to be looked at. He kept his hands loose on the table, his coffee cup untouched, his breathing in the long, slow rhythm that communicated nothing. The Shin family, Mr. Yu began, has great respect for what the Kang organization has built. I appreciate that, Jae-hyun said. The respect is why we wanted this conversation directly. Mr. Yu turned his coffee cup a quarter rotation. There is some concern, among several families, not only ours, about the direction of certain decisions. What direction specifically? Contraction. Mr. Yu said the word the way a doctor said a diagnosis, not unkindly, but without softening. The Incheon route, the Busan agreements, the Yongsan network. 3 significant operations in 90 days, he paused. The spaces those operations occupied do not remain empty. I'm aware. Our concern, Mr. Yu continued, is that the contraction is not strategic, that it reflects a change in orientation within the Kang leadership that makes longer-term cooperation difficult to plan for. Jae-hyun looked at him. What kind of cooperation are you planning for? Mr. Yu smiled. It was the smile of a man who had prepared for this question. The Shin family, together with certain allied interests, is in a position to absorb the operational infrastructure you've been stepping back from. This would not be a hostile action. It would be a business arrangement, one that would include significant compensation to the Kang organization and a clear delineation of remaining territory. You're asking me to sell. We're offering to buy. The distinction in Mr. Yu's tone was important to him. At a price that reflects the genuine value of what you've built. This is not a takeover. It is a retirement package for an organization that appears to be moving in that direction regardless. The coffee shop had 6 other tables. 4 were occupied. Park's people had the table nearest the door. Mr. Yu had come with one man who sat at the counter and had not looked at them once, which was the kind of discipline that indicated professional training. Jae-hyun said, "And if I decline?" Mr. Yu's smile didn't change. Then the spaces continue to fill without arrangement, which creates friction. Friction creates incidents. Incidents create attention. A small pause. Attention is expensive for everyone. That sounds like a threat dressed as an observation. It is an observation, Mr. Yu said. The dressing is your interpretation. Jae-hyun picked up his coffee cup. He drank from it slowly. The coffee was too hot, and he registered the burn at the back of his throat without showing it. I'll consider your family's position, he said. We would appreciate a response within 2 weeks. You'll have one. Mr. Yu stood. He buttoned his jacket with the careful motion of a man who had never left a single thing unfinished. "One more thing," he said, as though it had just occurred to him, which meant it had been the whole point. "There are people watching the Kang organization's movements carefully. Not only us. Some of the watching is less professionally bounded than ours." He met Jae-hyun's eyes. "I mention this in the spirit of the respect I described earlier. Personal decisions have a way of becoming organizational vulnerabilities. Men who are distracted make errors they would not otherwise make." He left. Jae-hyun sat with his too hot coffee and looked at the space where Mr. Yu had been, and understood completely that the last 40 seconds of that conversation had not been about the Shin family's business interests at all. He told Park in the car. All of it. The offer, the framing, the final 30 seconds. Park listened without interrupting, which was his habit. When Jae-hyun finished, Park was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They know about the woman." "The last part was a message, yes." "How much do they know?" "Enough to mention it. Not enough to have acted on it yet, or Mr. Yu would not have been in that coffee shop. He would have sent someone with different skills." Park absorbed this. "The 2-week window isn't a negotiation timeline," he said. "No. It's a demonstration that they're being patient. They're showing me they can afford to wait." "Can they?" Jae-hyun looked out the window. They were crossing the bridge. Below them, the Han River was gray and flat and enormous, the way it always was in the morning, indifferent to everything happening on its banks. "They can afford to wait longer than I can afford to give them," he said. Park said nothing for a moment. Then, "Boss, the woman and the boy need to be moved." "Moved where?" "Out of reach, temporarily, until this resolves." "And if I tell her she needs to move without explaining why?" "Tell her whatever you need to tell her. But if Lee Do-won is already running her name, which I believe he is, then in approximately 10 days she becomes usable as leverage against you." Park's voice was as level as ever, but something underneath it had changed. A tightening that meant he was out past the edge of what he was comfortable with. "I have kept people safe in this organization for 19 years by understanding when something becomes a liability before it becomes a catastrophe. I am telling you, this is a week from becoming a catastrophe." Jae-hyun's jaw tightened. He could feel the muscle in it, the small, automatic betrayal of pressure he couldn't entirely contain. "She's not in this organization." "She doesn't need to be," Park said. "She just needs to be something you care about, which you've made visible, which means she's already in it, whether you put her there or not." The car crossed the bridge and descended into the city's north side. Jae-hyun watched the streets organize themselves around him. The familiar geography of a city he had moved through for 20 years like a man who owned its shadows. "Set up the relocation logistics," he said. "I'll handle the conversation." "When?" "Today." He did not handle it today. He told himself it was because the right moment did not present itself, which was the kind of reasoning he would have rejected instantly from any member of his organization, and which he applied to himself with the specific blindness of a man who is afraid of a conversation and has stopped admitting it. 3 days passed. He ran the Shin organization's offer through his analysts. He had 2 encrypted calls with lawyers who handled the clean side of his holdings. He reviewed the documents Park prepared on relocation options. Temporary housing outside Seoul, a week, perhaps 2, framed as a complementary professional arrangement, something that could be explained as a corporate gesture without requiring the real explanation. He looked at the documents and did not send them. On the 4th day, his phone rang at 11:40 at night with a number he did not recognize. He almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers were either wrong turns or carefully planned ones, and either way the hour suggested nothing comfortable. He answered because not answering an unknown number at 11:40 at night was the kind of decision that sometimes cost you the next 12 hours. "Mr. Kang." The voice was male, Korean, young, mid-20s at most, with the particular flatness of someone who had trained the expression out of their voice. "I apologize for the hour." "Who is this?" "My name isn't important. I work for people who have been watching your recent decisions with interest." A pause. "Not the Shin family, different interests." Jae-hyun was out of bed and at his window in 3 seconds. He looked at the street below. Empty. The ordinary nighttime emptiness of his residential block. Nothing that shouldn't be there. What kind of interests? The kind that are concerned about what happens to the infrastructure you've been dismantling. The voice was careful, almost formal. Specifically, the Incheon route. There were people who depended on that route, people with significant investment in its continuation. The Incheon operation was generating legal exposure. The decision was mine to make. The decision was yours, the voice agreed. The consequences are shared. A beat. We have been patient because we believed the contraction was temporary, a quarter's adjustment, a strategic pause. But the Busan agreements, and now the Yongsan network, these are not adjustments. These are structural changes. I don't negotiate organizational decisions with anonymous callers at midnight. This isn't a negotiation, the voice said. And then, without changing its register, still flat, still almost polite. We know about the woman in Mapogu. We know about the scholarship. We know you were in the park last Tuesday. Jae-hyun's hand on the phone went absolutely still. We're not making threats, the voice continued. We're making a point about exposure. Your exposure. The woman's exposure. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be deliberate. The boy is talented. It would be unfortunate if his situation became complicated. The line went dead. Jae-hyun stood at his window for 30 seconds without moving. Then he called Park. Park answered in 2 rings. He sounded awake, which meant he hadn't been asleep, which meant his own intelligence had already been generating alerts tonight. I was about to call you, Park said. Who made that call? Working on it. We pulled the number. Burner activated 4 days ago. The voice profile is being run now. Park's breathing was slightly faster than normal. There's something else. One of our people in Mapogu reported a vehicle parked near the Brooks building tonight. Dark SUV, plates registered to a shell company that traces back to... It takes 3 steps, but it traces back to an organization with historical ties to the Incheon operation. The cold that moved through Jae-hyun then was not the cold of fear. It was something older than fear. The cold of recognition, of seeing a shape in the dark that you have seen before and know the weight of. Get her out of that building, he said. Tonight. Boss? Tonight, Park. Right now. Move her to the Mapo safe house, both of them. And when she asks why, tell her there's a gas leak. Tell her anything. Get them out of the building and then call me. He was already moving toward his clothes. Park said, This is the moment I told you about. And Jae-hyun said, I know, and ended the call. What? Amara was awake. This was not unusual at 11:50 at night when Malcolm had fallen asleep with the television on and she had turned it off and found herself unable to follow him into sleep, lying in the dark with the specific wakefulness that came from a mind that had not finished its work for the day. She was thinking about the scholarship, the practicalities of it, the logistics, the materials list she needed to put together, the tutoring schedule. The foundation had sent over which conflicted with 2 of her standing work commitments and would require a conversation with her supervisor that she was not looking forward to. She was thinking about these things, and also, underneath these things, about a man who had crouched down to look at her son's sketchbook in a park in Mapogu and had not said the thing most adults said, which was some version of how impressive for his age, because that sentence always contained the word age in a way that made Malcolm's talent a function of his youth rather than itself. He had just looked at it, asked what city it was, received the answer without condescension. She was thinking about this when the knock came. Not her door, the building's intercom, which meant someone was at the street entrance. She looked at the clock. 11:52. She got up and went to the intercom without turning on lights, the way you moved in an apartment at night when a child was asleep down the hall. Ms. Brooks. The voice on the intercom was male, Korean accented English, professional. My name is Park Sung-jin. I work with Kang Jae-hyun. There has been a safety concern reported in this building. I need to ask you to gather your son and essential items and come with me immediately. She stood at the intercom in the dark. What kind of safety concern? She said. I'll explain outside. Please move quickly. She stood very still for 5 seconds. She thought, this is insane. She thought, this is a man I met twice at a restaurant and a park. She thought, his name is Kang Jae-hyun, and I do not know what he does, and I put it in the drawer. She thought, the drawer is open now. Give me 10 minutes, she said. 5, Park said. Please. She woke Malcolm with the careful efficiency of a mother who had learned to move a child without full panic. Calm voice, firm hands, shoes on before he was completely alert. She packed one bag, documents, Malcolm's medication for the mild asthma that had troubled him since infancy, chargers, cash from the envelope she kept in the kitchen drawer. Malcolm was awake enough to know something was wrong and old enough to know that asking about it right now would not help. And he put his sketchbook in his jacket without being told and stood at the door and waited. She took one look at the apartment before she left. The ironing board still out from this morning, the dishes in the drying rack, the ordinary evidence of a life that was, from the outside, a completely normal life. She picked up the bag and took Malcolm's hand and went downstairs. Park Sung-jin in person was exactly what his voice had suggested, contained, watchful, the kind of physically unassuming presence that you looked past until you understood you shouldn't. He had a car at the building entrance. One other man sat in the driver's seat. He met her eyes briefly and said, "Thank you for moving quickly." And she said, "Where are we going?" And he said, "Somewhere safe." And she stopped walking. "I need more of that," she said. Malcolm's hand was in hers. He was watching Park with the direct, unblinking assessment of a child who was reading a room and not yet sure what it said. Park looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not softening exactly, but adjusting, the recalibration of a man who had planned to manage this encounter and was now dealing with someone who was not going to be managed. "There are people who have been watching this building," he said. "People connected to Mr. Kang's business. You and your son have been identified. The safest thing right now is to move you to a location those people don't know about while Mr. Kang addresses the situation." She looked at him for a long moment. "Connected to his business? How?" "I'm not able to give you a complete answer right now." "What business?" she said. "What does he actually do?" Park held her gaze. He said nothing. His silence was the most informative thing anyone had said to her in 4 days. She felt something cold settle into the center of her chest. Not fear, or not only fear. The particular cold of a suspicion confirmed, of a drawer you've been avoiding opening and which has now come open on its own. "Get in the car, Mom," Malcolm said quietly. She looked down at him. I was looking up at her with the serious, practical face he used when he had assessed a situation and arrived at an answer before she had. She had no idea what he understood or didn't understand. She knew that he trusted her judgment and was telling her, in his 8 3/4-year-old way, that her judgment said, "Get in the car." She got in the car. What? The safe house was a clean apartment in a building in Yongsan that showed no evidence of regular occupancy, too tidy, the refrigerator stocked with the generic efficiency of someone who had prepared it quickly rather than lived in it, the furniture arranged with the functional geometry of a room designed to be usable rather than inhabited. Malcolm went immediately to the window and looked out at the city lights. Amara put her bag down and stood in the middle of the room and waited. Park remained near the door. "Mr. Kong will come in the morning," he said. "I'll have someone at the building entrance tonight." "You'll have someone," she repeated. "Yes." "You have people." "Yes." She breathed in once through her nose. "What is he?" she said. Not a question she was asking for the first time. She had been asking it internally for 4 days, but the first time she had said it out loud in a room with someone who knew the answer. Park met her eyes. "That's a conversation for Mr. Kang to have. I'm asking you." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "And I'm telling you it's his conversation, not because I'm protecting him, because you deserve to hear it from him." He paused. "For what it's worth. And I understand if it's worth nothing. He has not been reckless with you. He has been careful in ways he is not always capable of being. That is not a justification. It's context." He left. She heard the lock turn from outside, but not locked in. She could see the handle was accessible from inside, but the sound of it made Malcolm look up from the window. "Mom?" he said. "Yeah." "Is Mr. Kang in trouble?" She looked at her son. 8 years old, shoes still on, sketchbook in his jacket, standing at a window in an apartment they had been brought to in the middle of the night by a man named Park. The city below the window was blazing with its usual indifferent light. "I don't know," she said. "Are we in trouble?" She crossed the room and crouched in front of him the way she had done since he was small enough that crouching put her at his eye level, though now he was tall enough that she had to look slightly up. She put her hands on his shoulders. She looked at him. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight we're okay." He nodded. He accepted this with the specific trust of a child who has learned that his mother's tonight. "We're okay. means exactly what it says and nothing more and nothing less, and that she would tell him when tonight became something different. "Can I draw?" he said. "Yes," she said. "You can draw." Jae-hyun arrived at 4:17 in the morning. He had spent the intervening hours doing the work that the phone call had accelerated. 3 encrypted calls. A meeting with 2 of his senior lieutenants in a building in Gangnam that he had left at 3:30 with a plan that was functional and brutal and would cost him things he had not yet finished calculating. He arrived at the Yongsan apartment with the particular quality of a man who had been awake for 22 hours and was still fully present in the way that some people were under pressure. Not wired, not frantic, but stripped down, the non-essential things burned off, and only the load-bearing structure remaining. Park was in the hallway. He looked at Jae-hyun once and said nothing. Jae-hyun went inside. Amara was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she had found in the cupboard and made herself. Malcolm was asleep on the couch under a blanket that had come from somewhere in the apartment's linen closet, his sketchbook open on the cushion beside him. She looked at Jae-hyun when he came in. She did not get up. She waited. He sat down across from her at the kitchen table. He did not offer preamble. He had been rehearsing, in the car, the clean way to begin this, and he had arrived at the understanding that there was no clean way and that attempting one would be an insult to the intelligence of the woman across from him. "The scholarship," he said. "I arranged it." She was very still. "I knew about the application. I had access to it through a foundation I fund, through the organization I run." He put his hands flat on the table. "I moved Malcolm to the top of the queue, 4 days after I met you." The silence was the kind that had weight. He felt it pressing on the space between them. "The organization," she said. "Yes." "What organization?" He looked at her. He had been looking at her since he sat down, not because he owed her eye contact as a performance of honesty, but because she deserved to see his face clearly while he did this, to read it however she needed to read it. "The Kong Syndicate," he said. "I am the head of one of the largest criminal organizations in Korea. I have been since I was 26 years old. What I run, what I have spent the last 4 months trying to dismantle from the inside, is built on things I cannot describe in this kitchen without making you and Malcolm less safe than you already are." She did not move. She did not look away. Her hands were around the coffee cup and her knuckles were pale with the pressure, and that was the only physical evidence of what was happening inside her. "The people outside my building tonight," she said, "are connected to operations I've been shutting down, people who are losing revenue because of decisions I've been making." He paused. "They found you because I was careless. I made myself visible with you. I broke rules I have kept for 20 years, and I did it because—" He stopped. He had arrived at the sentence he had not planned. "I did it because I was not able to stop." She looked at him. The expression on her face was not the one he had prepared himself for. Not anger, not the collapse into distress, not the hard withdrawal of someone who has decided they were deceived and is now erecting the wall. It was something more complicated and more frightening than any of those things. It was the expression of a woman who had already known and had been waiting for the confirmation. "The drawer," she said quietly, almost to herself. He did not know what that meant. He waited. She breathed in once. She looked at Malcolm asleep on the couch. She looked back at Jae-hyun. "How much danger are we in?" "Right now?" "Contained. I have people on this building and on your regular building. I am addressing the source of the threat through channels that will be resolved within 10 days. He said this with precision because the precision was what was true, and she needed truth over comfort. But I cannot guarantee that 10 days solves everything, and I will not tell you that it does. And after 10 days? After 10 days, I will have either dismantled the part of this that created the threat, or I will have made arrangements for you and Malcolm that take you permanently out of its reach." He paused. "Either way, the connection to me has to end." She looked at him. "What connection?" she said. "We've had dinner once in Hotok in a park." "You know that's not what I mean." "I know," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "I know what you mean." Malcolm shifted on the couch. His sketchbook slid off the cushion and landed open on the floor. Neither of them moved to pick it up. "You should have told me," she said. "Before the park. Before—" She stopped. Started again. You arranged a scholarship for my son. You moved his application to the top of a list, with money from—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Yes," he said. "I know what that is. I know what it costs you to receive it." "Do you?" "Yes." She stood up. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him, looking at the city's 4 a.m. stillness. He watched the line of her shoulders, the way she held herself. Not broken, nothing in her posture that looked like breaking, but something reorganizing, recalculating the geometry of the past 2 weeks against new information. "I have to return the scholarship," she said. He said nothing. "I can't keep it," she said. "Malcolm can't." Her voice caught, just once, and then steadied. "I can't let him build something on a foundation made of—" "I know," Jae-hyun said. She turned around. Her eyes were dry. They had been dry the whole time, which was not the absence of feeling. He could see that clearly, but the presence of a discipline that was costing her something in real time. "Tell me one true thing," she said. "One thing that wasn't strategy, wasn't management, wasn't you controlling a situation." He looked at her across the kitchen of the safe house at 4 a.m, with Malcolm asleep on the couch and the city silent outside. "The drawing," he said. "In the park. The city that wasn't a city." He paused. "I recognized it. The feeling in it. I have felt that my entire adult life, and I have never seen anyone else name it, least of all an 8-year-old with the sketchbook." He did not look away from her. That was not strategy. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "What do you need me to do?" He understood the question was not forgiveness, and not agreement, and not the beginning of something restored. It was the question of a woman who was in a situation she hadn't chosen and was deciding, with the full clarity of someone who has just had every useful illusion removed, how to move forward from it. "Stay here for 2 days," he said. "Let me resolve the immediate threat. Then I'll explain every option available to you. Every one, with full information, and you make whatever choice you need to make." "And Malcolm's scholarship?" He said nothing for a moment. "I'll have it transferred to a clean foundation, one with no connection to me or anything I've built. His application stands on its own. It was always strong enough. The only thing I changed—" She absorbed this. 2 days, she said. 2 days. She looked at him once more, the full, unmediated look she had been giving him since the restaurant, the one that contained all the questions and had been filing them in a drawer she had now opened and was now reading everything in it at once. "You need to fix this," she said. "Whatever you did to create it. You need to end it." "I know." "Not for me," she said. "I'm not— This isn't an ultimatum about us. There is no us, you understand that." Her voice was steady and hard and completely honest. "I mean, you need to end it because it is the right thing. Because somewhere inside whatever you've been running, there are consequences that have nothing to do with me and Malcolm, and you know that, and you have known it for longer than 4 months." He sat very still. "Yes," he said. "I know that." She nodded. She turned back to the window. He sat at the kitchen table of the safe house and looked at the open sketchbook on the floor. The impossible city, the feeling of being somewhere and not knowing if you belonged, and understood that he had just passed through the last door that could have remained closed, and that there was nothing on the other side of it except the full weight of everything he was going to have to do next, and no version of himself left that could pretend otherwise. He left the safe house at 4:41 in the morning. Park was in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who had been running calculations for the past 6 hours and had arrived at numbers he didn't like. He looked at Jae-hyun when the door opened and read something in his face and straightened without being told. "She knows," Park said. Not a question. "Everything relevant." Park absorbed this with a single slow breath. "And?" "She's staying 2 days. Then we give her full options and she decides." Jae-hyun moved toward the stairwell. "Walk with me." They went down 2 flights before Jae-hyun stopped. The stairwell was clean, empty, the kind of anonymous interior space that existed in every building in the city, concrete and fluorescent light and the faint smell of cleaning product. He turned to face Park. "I need to end this in 10 days, he said. "All of it. The Shin negotiation, the Incheon people, Lee Do-won. Everything that's currently pointing in her direction needs to be resolved or removed." Park looked at him for a long moment. "When you say resolved, I mean neutralized. Legally, where possible. Otherwise, where necessary. He held Park's gaze. I'm not asking you to do anything that crosses lines you haven't already drawn for yourself. I'm telling you what I need, and I need you to tell me honestly what's achievable. In 10 days. In 10 days. Park looked at the floor. He had the posture of a man doing structural load calculations in real time. What holds, what doesn't, where the weight goes when you shift it. The Shin offer, he said. If we accept it, it buys us protection from the Shin-aligned families, removes 2 of the 4 immediate threat vectors. Accept it. Park looked up. In 19 years, Jae-hyun had never said those 2 words about an offer of this nature. His expression registered this without becoming readable. That's 2 billion won in infrastructure, minimum. Accept it. A beat. The Incheon people are harder. They're not an organization with a face we can negotiate with. They're a consortium, 4 or 5 business interests that shared the route. No single point of contact. Find the largest single investor in that consortium, Jae-hyun said, the one with the most to lose from exposure, and then expose enough of it that they understand what accepting a settlement looks like compared to the alternative. That's leverage. Yes. That kind of leverage takes, I have the documentation, Jae-hyun said. I've been building it for 8 months. Every operation I shut down, I kept records. Financial flows, names, movement logs. I didn't build it for this, but it applies. Park stared at him. Something moved across his face that was not quite shock. Park was too experienced for shock, but was its more seasoned cousin. You've been building an evidence file. Yes. On our own operations. On the operations I inherited and have been dismantling. Yes. He met Park's eyes. I didn't know what I was building it for. Now I do. The fluorescent light above them buzzed faintly. Somewhere above them, in the apartment, Amara Brooks was standing at a window looking at the 4 in the morning city. Her son was asleep on a couch, with a sketchbook on the floor beside him. Lee Do-won, Park said. I'll handle Lee Do-won. Boss? Personally, Jae-hyun said. I'll handle him personally. Park looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then he said, I need 48 hours to position the Shin acceptance properly. If we move too fast, it looks like capitulation, which invites additional pressure from other families. 48 hours, Jae-hyun said. Then we move everything simultaneously. Simultaneously. Yes, all of it at once. If they can't coordinate a response faster than we execute, we control the window. Park was quiet. He was doing the math again, the long version, the one that included variables Jae-hyun couldn't see from where he was standing. Then he said, It's possible. I know it's possible. Can you do it? Park straightened fully. He put his hands at his sides. I've been doing impossible things for this organization for 19 years, he said. Give me 48 hours. The 48 hours had a specific texture. Jae-hyun did not sleep. He did not particularly try. He moved through the work with the focused efficiency of a man who has made a decision that removes the cost of all prior deliberation, the clarity that comes not from certainty about outcomes, but from the absolute absence of remaining alternatives. The first day was documentation. He spent 11 hours in the back office of the Gangnam building with 2 lawyers, his financial director, and a former prosecutor who now worked for a firm that specialized in the kind of legal architecture that could withstand significant scrutiny. They built the structural case for the Shin acceptance, the terms, the protections, the clean separation of assets that could be legitimized from those that couldn't. The lawyers were good at what they did and did not ask questions that went past the edges of what they needed to know. The former prosecutor asked 3 questions that cut to the exact center of the problem each time, and Jae-hyun answered all 3 with complete accuracy, and when they were finished, the man looked at him across the table and said, This is going to be expensive. I know, Jae-hyun said, not just money. I know. The former prosecutor nodded once and went back to his documents. Park handled the Incheon consortium. He found the largest single investor in 4 hours, a shipping company executive in Busan named Xian, who had put substantial personal capital into the route through 3 intermediary companies, and who had a wife, 2 adult children, and a board of directors who did not know he existed in the same sentence as criminal infrastructure. Park sent him a package at 9 in the morning on the second day. It contained a summary of the documentation Jae-hyun had assembled, financial flows, his name appearing in 6 separate transaction chains, and a single-page letter outlining a settlement amount and a deadline of 72 hours. Cheon called Park directly at 11:40. He accepted by 2 in the afternoon. That left Lee Do-won. Lee Do-won ran his operations out of a building in Mapogu that officially housed a security consulting firm. He was 47 years old, had been in the Choi family's employ for 18 years, and had developed a reputation over those 18 years for the kind of methodical, professional approach to violence that was more frightening than the disorganized kind because it had no emotional weather. He did not get angry. He did not make threats. He didn't intend to carry out. He assessed situations with the flat precision of a man for whom other people's pain was simply an instrument of negotiation. Jae-hyun knew him. Not well. They had been in the same rooms 3 or 4 times over the years, the professional intersections that happen in their world at a certain level, but well enough to understand that the standard playbook did not apply. You could not leverage Do-won with documentation. You could not settle with him the way you settled with a business consortium. I was not an investor who could be frightened by exposure. He was an instrument, and instruments did not negotiate. What you could do was make him irrelevant. If the Choi family understood that Jae-hyun was in formal negotiation with the Shin organization, that the territorial realignment was happening through channels, with legal architecture, with protections for all parties, then deploying Do-won would be a violation of the process that would cost the Choi family more than it gained them. Organizations like the Choi family were brutal, but they were also rational. Brutality in service of rational goals was the instrument. Brutality that undermined those goals was waste. This was the calculation. It depended on the Choi family's leadership, making a rational decision faster than Do-won could act independently. Jae-hyun had 40 hours. He called the Choi family's head directly. This was not something that was normally done. Direct calls between family heads meant you were either making a significant offer or declaring something that had no diplomatic version. The head of the Choi family, a man named Choi Byum-soo, 71 years old, answered his private line in 3 rings. "Kong," he said. "Just the name. No title, no greeting." "I'm calling to tell you that I've accepted the Shin family's offer," Jae-hyun said. "The formal process begins in 36 hours. Documentation is already in preparation." Silence on the line. Then, "That was fast." "The offer was reasonable." "The offer was..." A pause. "It doesn't leave much of your position intact." "The position I'm surrendering was generating more cost than value," Jae-hyun said. "I'm calling to tell you directly because I believe you're a man who prefers direct communication to inference." Another pause. Jae-hyun could hear Choi Byum-soo breathing, the slightly labored breath of an old man who had survived by being careful. "And you're telling me this now because any action taken against peripheral interests in the next 36 hours would complicate the formal process in ways that would ultimately cost the Choi family their share of the territorial realignment." He paused. "The Shin offer includes provisions for all 5 families, including yours." The line was quiet for 10 full seconds. "I'll want to see the provisional terms," Choi Byum-soo said. "Park will send them within the hour." "And Lee Do-won is why I'm calling you instead of him," Jae-hyun said. The old man breathed in once. Then, "I'll speak with him." The call ended. Jae-hyun sat in the car. He had been driving while he made the call, the precise controlled movement of a man who needed his body occupied while his mind worked, and looked at the road in front of him. He had perhaps 30 hours before the weight of everything he had just set in motion became irreversible. 30 hours inside which every piece had to move in the right sequence or the whole structure failed. He called Park. "Send the Choi terms." "Already drafted," Park said. "I'll send in 10 minutes. A pause. "There's something else." The something else was always the thing that mattered. "What?" "Do-won moved last night, before your call to Choi Byum-soo." Jae-hyun's hand tightened on the steering wheel. "Moved how?" He had someone run a detailed profile on the Brooks woman. Employment, daily schedule, the boys' school. "Our man inside the Choi operation says he built it over 3 days." Park's voice had gone very flat. "The profile went to Do-won personally, not to Choi leadership, personally. He went off book. He went off book." This was the variable Jae-hyun had not been able to control. Instruments, when they operated independently of the rational organizations that deployed them, were no longer rational. Do-won was not acting for the Choi family right now. He was acting for whatever drove a man like him when he was not being directed. The professional pride of someone who had identified a target and didn't like being told to stand down. "Where is he now?" Jae-hyun said. "Last confirmed location was Mapogu," Park said. 2 hours ago. Mapogu. Where the safe house was not. Where Amara's original building was. "She's not there," Jae-hyun said. "He might not know that yet." "He'll know within the hour." Park said nothing for a moment. "You can't go to him directly. That creates an incident that blows up the Shin process before it starts." "I know." "Then what?" Jae-hyun thought about it for exactly 4 seconds, which was all the time he had. Do-won's off book. That means Choi Byung-soo doesn't know he built that profile. He went around leadership. He pulled the car over. "Call Choi Byung-soo back." "Not me. You. Tell him what Do-won's been doing independently. Make sure he understands that his enforcer is creating an incident without authorization that will cost the Choi family their share of the realignment." "I'm using Choi to leash his own man." "Yes. That works if Choi moves faster than Do-won does." "Then you need to make the call before I finish this sentence." He heard Park pull the phone from his ear. He heard the sound of another line being opened. Then Park came back and said, "Calling now. Where are you going?" "To make sure it works," Jae-hyun said. He put the car in gear, tap. The building in Mapogu, where Amara had lived for 2.5 years, was a 12-story residential block with a pharmacy on the ground floor and a convenience store. 3 doors down, and a small park visible from the 8th floor window where a boy had once fallen asleep with the television on. Jae-hyun had been outside it once, the night he drove her home, and had looked at it from the car with the particular attention he gave to things that were becoming important. He arrived at 7:20 in the evening. The street was populated with the ordinary foot traffic of a residential block at the end of a working day. People returning home, a delivery driver, 2 women with grocery bags, a man walking a dog the size of a small furniture piece. The streetlights were coming on. The pharmacy window was lit. He saw Do-won's man before he saw Do-won. The man was standing near a bus stop 40 meters from the building entrance. He was too still for someone waiting for a bus, the slight excess of stillness that came from performing casualness rather than feeling it. Jae-hyun clocked him in 3 seconds and kept walking, keeping his pace even, his hands in his jacket pockets, his face at the angle of a man thinking about dinner. He turned a corner. He stopped. He called Park. "Status," he said. "Choi Byung-soo is furious," Park said. "He didn't know about the profile. He's been trying to reach Do-won for 20 minutes. Do-won's not answering. "No." "He has a man on the original building." "How many?" "1 visible. Probably 2 more positioned." Park was quiet for 2 seconds. "Choi's sending his own people to pull Do-won back. 20 minutes. "I don't have 20 minutes. Jae-hyun." Park rarely used his name without the title. It landed differently when he did. "Do not engage Do-won directly. If something happens to him while the Shin process is in motion, I'm not going to do anything to him," Jae-hyun said. "I'm going to talk to him." "That is the least reassuring thing you've said in 2 days. He ended the call. He came back around the corner with the same pace as before, and this time he walked directly toward the bus stop. The man saw him coming when he was 20 meters out. He was good. His reaction was minimal, just a slight shift in weight, a recalibration. He had the phone to his ear before Jae-hyun was 10 meters away. Jae-hyun stopped beside him. "Tell him I'm here," he said. "Tell him I want 2 minutes." The man looked at him. He was younger than Jae-hyun had expected. Late 20s, the kind of young that still believed professional distance was a physical fact rather than a practice. He said something quietly into the phone and waited. 30 seconds. Then he said, "Around the corner, the parking structure." The parking structure was 2 streets over, 3 levels, mostly empty at this hour, the ground floor holding 8 or 9 cars and the particular acoustic flatness of concrete on all sides. Do-won was on the ground floor near the stairwell, standing with his back to the far wall and his hands in his coat pockets, and he was alone except for 1 man at the entrance behind Jae-hyun. Jae-hyun walked to him. He stopped 4 meters away. They looked at each other. Jae-hyun had been in rooms with men like Do-won his entire adult life, and he understood the specific grammar of this kind of confrontation, the weight distribution, the eye contact, the quality of silence that meant readiness rather than calm. He kept his own hands visible. He kept his breathing slow. "You built a profile on a civilian," Jae-hyun said. Do-won looked at him without expression. "I built a profile on an asset." "She's not an asset. She's not in this." "She became in this when you put her there." Do-won's voice was flat and even and completely devoid of aggression, which was what made it frightening. "You made yourself visible with a civilian, Kang. In our world, that means she's already in it whether you intended it or not." "I know." He had said these words to Park. He had said them to himself. "I made an error. I'm correcting it." By accepting the Shin offer, Do-won said it without inflection. Not a question, a statement of intelligence he had already assembled. "You're dismantling your position to protect a woman you've met twice." "I'm making a business decision." "It's not a business decision," Do-won said. "I've been watching this organization for 3 months. I've watched you close 2 billion won in operations. That's not business. That's something else." He tilted his head slightly. "My family has interests in the spaces you've been clearing. We've been patient. We've given you room to make whatever decision you were making. But patience has an edge, and you've been standing on it." "Your family is getting a share of the realignment," Jae-hyun said. "Choi Byom-soo has the provisional terms. You'll have more territory through the formal process than you've gained through any independent action." "My family might," Do-won said. "I'm talking about my interests." The air between them changed. It was a small change, a degree of temperature, a fraction of distance. But Jae-hyun felt it the way you felt the specific stillness before something broke. "What interests?" he said. Do-won reached into his coat pocket slowly, with the careful deliberateness of a man demonstrating that the motion was not a threat. He took out a phone. He held it up. On the screen was a photograph. Mapo Hanggang Park, afternoon light, a bench. Amara and Malcolm. Jae-hyun crouching to look at a sketchbook. 3 days ago," Do-won said, "before your people moved them." He lowered the phone. "The boys' school is in Mapo. He has an 8:30 start, and he walks the same route 4 days out of 5. He paused. "I'm not going to do anything to them. I want to be clear about that. I'm demonstrating what I know, and what I know means I have leverage that exists independently of the Shin process and Choi Byom-soo's instructions." Jae-hyun's chest was doing something he didn't have a word for. It was not fear. It was adjacent to fear, in the same neighborhood, but with a different quality. It was the feeling of something that mattered being held by someone who didn't care about it. "What do you want?" he said. His voice was completely level. I was proud of that. "The Yongsan network," Do-won said. "Not the territory, the operational infrastructure, the contacts, the distribution lines, the systems your people built. All of it transferred to my operation before the formal realignment closes. That's not yours to take." "No," Do-won agreed. "It's yours to give." He put the phone back in his pocket. "And you're going to give it. Because the alternative is that I continue gathering information about a woman and a boy in Mapogu indefinitely, and at some point that information becomes a problem that can't be walked back." Jae-hyun looked at him. The parking structure was silent. The man at the entrance had not moved. Somewhere above them a car door opened and closed. Someone on the second level going about the completely ordinary business of their completely ordinary life. He thought about Amara at the kitchen table of the safe house at 4 in the morning, with her hands around a coffee cup and her knuckles white with the pressure she was not allowing into her face. He thought about Malcolm asleep on the couch. He thought about a sketchbook on the floor. He thought about the documentation he had been building for 8 months. "I need 48 hours, he said. Do-won looked at him, reading him the way men in this world read each other, not for emotional content but for structural integrity, for the thing underneath the words that either held or didn't. 48 hours for what? To transfer the Yongsan infrastructure in a way that doesn't create a legal problem for either of us in the middle of the formal process. He kept his voice flat and practical. If it moves wrong, it looks like asset stripping to the Shin lawyers, which blows up the whole realignment, which means you lose the Choi family's territorial share along with everything else. Do-won considered this. 48 hours, he said. Then I expect the transfer package. You'll have it. He turned and walked toward the parking structure entrance. The man at the entrance stepped aside. Jae-hyun walked past him and out into the night air of the street, and kept walking for half a block at the same pace as before, and then stopped with his hand flat against the cold wall of the building beside him, and stood there for 30 seconds with his eyes closed and his breathing doing things it did not normally do. He had lied. He had no intention of transferring the Yongsan infrastructure. What he had was 48 hours, which was what he had needed and what he had taken, and what he was going to do with it was different and irreversible, and was going to end things in a way that Do-won was not going to be able to walk back from. He called Park. He wants the Yongsan network, Jae-hyun said, transferred within 48 hours. Are you? I told him yes. He pushed off the wall and started walking. I need everything we have on Do-won's independent operations. The things he's been running outside the Choi family's knowledge. Everything. I want it in my hands in 6 hours. Park was quiet for 3 seconds. That's a different kind of leverage than the Incheon approach. Yes. If we use it, it doesn't go back in the box. Do-won spends the next several years answering questions that he cannot answer without implicating his own family. I know. And Choi Byum-soo will know where it came from. Yes. You're willing to make an enemy of the Choi family. Jae-hyun walked through the evening street with his hands back in his pockets, and the cold air coming off the river 2 blocks over, and the city doing its relentless ordinary business around him. I'm willing to make an enemy of Lee Do-won, he said. Choi Byum-soo is a rational man who will understand the math once the dust settles. And if you're wrong about the math, then I'm wrong, he said. Get me the documentation. 6 hours. He walked back to his car. He sat in it with the engine off for a full minute. He thought about 48 hours and what had to happen inside them, all of it, without error, without hesitation, without the luxury of reconsidering any of it once it started moving. He thought about the way Do-won had held up the phone, the flat professional ease of a man demonstrating control over something that was not his, and the specific cold that had moved through him at the sight of that photograph, the bench, the afternoon light, a boy with a sketchbook. He started the engine. He had built the evidence file for 8 months without knowing what he was building it for. He knew now. He had always known, somewhere beneath the deliberate not knowing. The file was not just documentation, it was the instrument of something final. The mechanism by which a man who had inherited a life he did not choose could take the one action that was fully, irrevocably his own. He drove. The city moved around him in all its blazing indifference. And inside the car, Kang Jae-hyun sat with the weight of everything he was about to set in motion, and felt, underneath the fear and the exhaustion, and the specific grief of a man burning down the only world he has ever known, something that was almost like the first full breath he had taken in 20 years. The documentation arrived at 2 in the morning. Park brought it himself. A physical folder, not encrypted files, not a digital transfer, because what was inside it was the kind of material that needed to exist in as few places as possible. He set it on the desk in the Gangnam office and stood back with his arms at his sides and did not say anything while Jae-hyun opened it and read. It took 40 minutes to read completely. Lee Do-won had been running 3 operations independently of the Choi family for the past 6 years. Not skimming, that was common enough that it barely registered as transgression in their world, but full parallel operations, a protection network in 3 districts of Seoul that collected revenue which never appeared in Choi family accounts, a money movement arrangement with 2 businesses in Incheon that used the same route Jae-hyun had shut down, and something more recent and more serious, a working relationship with a Chinese criminal consortium that the Choi family had publicly declined to engage with 18 months ago on grounds that the consortium's methods created legal exposure that was unacceptable. Do-won had engaged with them anyway, privately, using Choi family infrastructure and resources while keeping Choi family leadership in complete ignorance. Jae-hyun closed the folder. He put his hands flat on it and looked at the wall across from him. How solid is this? He said. Solid enough, Park said. Financial documentation, 2 corroborating sources inside the Choi operation who don't know about each other, and movement records that can be verified independently. He paused. It wouldn't survive full prosecutorial scrutiny. Our sources have their own exposure. But it doesn't need to. It needs to survive Choi Byum-soo reading it. And Choi Byum-soo reading it means. It means Lee Do-won spends the next period of his life answering questions from his own family rather than running operations for them. It means the Choi family's attention turns inward. Park's voice was careful, measured. It also means we've made a significant move against a family we're in the middle of negotiating a territorial realignment with. That has a cost. I know the cost. Do you want me to enumerate it? No, Jae-hyun said. I want you to deliver the folder to Choi Byung-soo personally, in the morning, before 9. Park looked at him. In 19 years, his face had revealed its actual contents perhaps a dozen times, and this was one of them. The expression of a man who has arrived at the edge of something and is deciding whether to step back or forward. If I do this, he said slowly, there is no version of it that doesn't come back to you eventually. Do-hwan will know where the documentation came from. He may not be able to prove it. He will know. Yes. And you're comfortable with that? Tae-hyun looked up from the folder. A man held up a photograph of a woman and her 8-year-old son in a parking structure and told me he'd been watching the boy's school route. He held Park's gaze. I'm not comfortable with any of this, but comfort stopped being available some time ago. Park picked up the folder. He tucked it under his arm with the care of a man handling something irreversible. He moved toward the door and then stopped. After this, he said without turning around, the Shin process will close. The Choi family will be occupied. The Incheon consortium has settled. He paused. There won't be much left to run. I know. I mean, there won't be much left of the organization, not the way it's been. I know, Park. A long moment. Then Park said, what do you want me to do after this is over? Jae-hyun thought about it. Whatever you need to do, he said. Whatever that looks like for you. I'm not in a position to ask for more from you than I already have. Park stood at the door for another 2 seconds. Then he nodded once, the small motion of a man receiving something and filing it in a place where it would not be reconsidered, and he left. Jae-hyun sat alone in the Gangnam office with his hands on an empty desk and the city making its 3 in the morning sounds outside, the distant machinery of a place that never fully stopped. And he let himself have 5 minutes of the feeling that was underneath everything he had been doing for the past 10 days. Not satisfaction, not relief. Something older and quieter than either of those, the feeling of a decision that has finally caught up with the person who made it. Then he picked up the phone and started the next call. Choi Byung-soo received Park at 8:47 in the morning. Park told Jae-hyun afterward in 2 sentences. The old man had read the folder without speaking, and when he finished, he had put it on the table between them and said, "Leave this with me." In a voice that Park described as very quiet, Park had left. He had driven back across the river and called Jae-hyun from the car with those 2 sentences and then said, "It's done." And Jae-hyun had said, "Thank you." And they had stayed on the line without speaking for about 10 seconds before ending the call, which was the closest either of them was going to get to acknowledging the weight of the 19 years in that silence. By midday, Lee Do-won had not called. By 3 in the afternoon, one of Park's sources inside the Choi operation reported that Do-won had been summoned to a private meeting with Choi Byung-soo and 2 of the family's senior lieutenants, and had not emerged from it after 2 hours. Tae-hyun was in the Yongsan safe house when he received this information. He had come at 11, not with the urgency of the previous visits, but with the deliberate pace of a man who had something to say that required the right conditions. He had knocked. Amara had opened the door and looked at him for a moment, and then stepped back to let him in without a word, which was its own kind of sentence. Malcolm was at the kitchen table with 3 different sketchbooks open around him, working on something large that had clearly expanded past the capacity of a single page. He looked up when Jae-hyun came in and said, "Hi, Mr. Kang," with the equanimity of a child who had decided this situation was interesting rather than frightening, and went back to drawing. Amara had made coffee again. She handed him a cup with the businesslike gesture of someone who had decided that extending basic courtesies did not constitute forgiveness or agreement, and was also just the right way to behave in a kitchen at 11 in the morning. He took it. He sat at the table across from where she stood against the counter. "The immediate threat is resolved," he said. She watched him. "The man with the file on us." "Yes, he's been redirected by his own organization." He held the cup in both hands. "It will hold. I'm confident it will hold." "And the other things?" The Shin family. The people connected to the route you closed. Shin process closes formally in 4 days. The Inchin consortium settled. He looked at her. There are going to be several months of organizational realignment that I'll need to manage carefully. But the vectors that pointed toward you and Malcolm are gone. She absorbed this with the same focused attention she brought to everything, not rushing to respond, processing it fully first. Gone, she said. Or moved. Gone, he said. I made sure of it. She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her weighing this, not his honesty, which she appeared to have made a decision about, but the architecture of it, whether the structure held. Okay, she said finally. He set down his coffee. There are things I need to tell you about what comes next, practically. He had rehearsed this less than he'd thought he would, had found, driving over, that the rehearsal kept coming apart because what he was about to say was simple, and the simple things never needed rehearsal, only courage. The Shin process involves the transfer of the majority of my operational holdings. By the time it closes, the organization I've been running will exist in a significantly reduced form. The legal holdings, the investment funds, the property portfolio, the above-board business interests, those remain intact. They're clean. They've always been clean, which was deliberate. He paused. I'll spend the next year in the process of formally restructuring everything remaining into legitimate operations. It will take time. It will cost a significant amount, but it's achievable. You're telling me the crime part is ending, she said. I'm telling you it's been ending for 8 months and it will finish in the next year. He met her eyes. I'm telling you this because you asked me to end it. Not because I need your acknowledgement, because you deserve to know that what you said in this kitchen at 4 in the morning was heard. Something moved across her face, not softening, more like a specific tension releasing, the way a muscle feels when you stop asking it to carry something. And the scholarship, she said, already transferred, yesterday morning. The Minjun Foundation's board has no knowledge of my involvement. I was never publicly connected to its operations. The scholarship is now administered entirely by the Foundation's independent committee. Malcolm's file was reevaluated by that committee with no external direction. He paused. They confirmed the award on their own. She was very still. His application was strong enough, Jae-hyun said. It was always strong enough. I changed the sequence, not the outcome. She looked at Malcolm at the kitchen table, who was pressing too hard with a red marker and had his tongue at the corner of his mouth with the effort of making something come out the way he could see it in his head. She looked back. He doesn't know any of this, she said. No. And I'm not going to tell him. That's your decision to make. She pushed off the counter. She walked to the window and stood there, and Jae-hyun watched her back, the particular set of her shoulders, the way she held herself when she was thinking through something difficult. Squared, not collapsed, the posture of someone who is taking the full weight of a thing rather than deflecting it. I'm going back to the apartment, she said. Today. Malcolm has school tomorrow. I know. Park will have someone on the building for the next 30 days. Visible, in the lobby. Not watching you, just a presence that communicates that the building has attention. He paused. You won't see them after 30 days. And after 30 days? After 30 days, you'll be a logistics coordinator at a Korean-American trade firm in Seoul with a son who has an arts scholarship. And none of what's happened in the past 2 weeks will have any daily relevance to your life. She turned from the window. She looked at him directly. Will any of what's happened have relevance to anything? Or is this just... She stopped, chose the next word carefully. Is this a thing that happened and then stops mattering? He understood the question was not about logistics. I don't know what it is, he said honestly. I know what I'm not able to offer you right now. I'm in the middle of dismantling something that took 20 years to build. The man I'm in the process of becoming is not finished yet. I don't think it's right to make claims about him when he isn't finished. She looked at him for a long time, then, That's the most honest thing you've said to me. I've been trying to be honest. I know, but that one didn't have any management in it. He said nothing. She was right. Malcolm looked up from his sketchbook. He looked at Jae-hyun, then at his mother, with the specific attentiveness of a child who has been tracking the emotional weather of a room without appearing to. Are we going home? He said. Today, Amara said. He looked at Jae-hyun again. Are you coming? Malcolm, Amara said. I'm just asking. No, Jae-hyun said. His voice came out even. Not today. Malcolm considered this with his characteristic seriousness. Then he looked back down at his sketchbook and said, "Okay," in the tone that meant he had filed the answer and moved on, which was a quality Jae-hyun found himself respecting in a way he couldn't fully articulate. The Shin process closed on a Thursday. Jae-hyun signed the formal documentation in a conference room in a law firm in central Seoul, surrounded by lawyers who had been paid significantly for their discretion and who maintained the practice neutrality of people in their profession. Park was there. The Shin family's legal representative was there. 2 notaries. No one else. It took 3 hours. The documents were substantial, the kind of legal architecture that took months to build and required absolute precision in its execution. When it was done, Jae-hyun had divested the central operational holdings of the Kong Syndicate into a structured settlement that distributed territorial rights across the Shin, Choi, and 3 smaller allied families, in exchange for formal recognition of the remaining legitimate business interests and a series of legal protections that his lawyers had fought for with the ferocity of people who understood that getting these terms right was the difference between a restructuring and a slow dismemberment. He signed the last document. He put the pen down. He looked at the stack of papers in front of him. Park, sitting beside him, said nothing. He understood that there was nothing useful to say. The Shin representative shook his hand across the table with the careful cordiality of a man who has gotten what he came for and is experienced enough not to show too much of it. Jae-hyun shook it with the same quality of correctness. Then the lawyers filed out of the room, and he sat alone at the conference table for a moment. Park had stepped out to take a call. With the afternoon light coming through the tall windows and the sound of the city below doing its usual indifferent business, he had lost, in the terms that his world understood, a great deal. The operational network his father had built over 30 years, the fear that had moved rooms when his name entered them, the absolute authority that came with being the head of an organization that could make things happen or stop happening with a call from an encrypted phone. What remained was, by the standards of any ordinary life, still substantial. The investment funds, the property holdings, the legitimate business interests that had always run parallel to the organization, kept clean precisely because he had known, on some level he'd never fully examined, that he was going to need them eventually. He had known for longer than 8 months. He understood that now. He had known since the first year, when his father had been dead for 12 months, and the empire was fully his, and he had sat in an office not unlike this one, and understood with total clarity that he was running a machine designed to continue itself regardless of the person operating it, and that the machine was going to continue running whether he wanted it to or not, unless someone physically stopped it. He had not known then how to stop. He had not been ready to pay the price. He had filed the knowledge in a drawer and closed the drawer and lived inside the machine for another 19 years. And all that time the knowledge had been sitting there waiting for the right thing to open it. He thought about a restaurant called Sowa and a woman in a green dress who had been waiting 73 minutes and had the specific stillness of someone who has decided that stillness is the only remaining form of dignity available. He recognized that stillness, he had said, and it was true. He had. 3 weeks after the Shin process closed, Jae-hyun's lawyers finished the preliminary restructuring plan for the remaining legitimate holdings. It was a document of considerable complexity. He spent 2 days reading it, going through each section with the same focused attention he had brought to every operational decision he had ever made. And when he was done, he approved it with 5 minor modifications and began the process of implementation. The work was different from the work he had done before. It was not less demanding. If anything, the legitimate operation of a significant investment portfolio required the same sustained attention as criminal organization, without the simplifying brutality of being able to resolve problems by other means. Problems had to be negotiated, endured, outlasted. People had to be persuaded rather than directed. Outcomes were less controllable and less certain. He found unexpectedly that he did not mind this. Park had taken a position with a private security consulting firm run by a former colleague, had told Jae-hyun about it in a brief conversation, almost matter of fact, with the emotional register of 2 men who have worked together long enough to know that the significant things between them do not require announcement. He had said, "The firm does legitimate work." And Jae-hyun had said, "I know." And Park had said, "I'll be available if you need consultation on security architecture for the legitimate holdings," which was the correct and professional way to say, I'm not gone. I'm just somewhere else. And there is continuity in this even if the form of it has changed. Chae-hyun had shaken his hand. Properly, with both hands, the formal gesture that in Korean context carried a weight that its appearance didn't fully convey. Park had received it without comment and had walked out, and Jae-hyun had stood in the empty Gangnam office for a few minutes alone. Then he had locked the office, returned the key to the building management, and gone home. He saw Amara for the first time since the safe house on a Saturday morning in November. He had not arranged it. He was at a coffee shop in Mapogu. He had business in the district, a meeting with the property manager of a building he owned through one of the legitimate holding companies. And he was early for the meeting and had stopped for coffee and was standing at the counter waiting for it when the door opened behind him and he heard a voice saying, "Just one, please. Actually, can I look at your pastry case for a second?" And he turned around. She was wearing a gray coat, her hair pulled back, and she was looking at the pastry case with the concentration of someone who has been promised a treat to herself and is taking it seriously. She had not seen him yet. He stood at the counter. She looked up and went very still. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The coffee shop moved around them. The espresso machine, a conversation between two women at the window table, someone's phone producing a notification sound. The ordinary texture of a Saturday morning in a neighborhood going about its business. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. She came to the counter. She ordered her coffee and a honey pastry, and when it was ready, they both, without discussion, moved to a small table near the back. Not conspicuously seeking it out, just the natural movement of two people carrying drinks who needed somewhere to set them down. "How are you?" he said. "Better," she said. "Malcolm started his tutoring sessions last week. It's been good." She wrapped her hands around her cup. He drew a portrait of his tutor in the first session. The tutor cried. Apparently. Malcolm told me this like it was confusing. It must have been a good portrait. It was a very good portrait. I've seen it. The tutor's face looked like someone who had just understood something for the first time. She paused. Which is what his work does sometimes. It makes you feel like you've understood something you already knew but hadn't found the word for. Chae-hyun thought about an impossible city on a sketchbook page. The feeling of being somewhere and not knowing if you belonged. "How is the restructuring?" she said. He looked at her. She had done her research, or she had inferred it. Either was consistent with who she was. "Moving forward," he said. "It's slower than I expected and more demanding, but it's moving." "Good." She broke off a piece of the honey pastry. She ate it with the focused pleasure of someone who has decided to be completely present for a promised treat. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the man you're becoming not being finished yet." He waited. "I think that's true of most people," she said. "I think it's possibly true of everyone, if they're doing it right." She looked at him. "I also think you said it specifically so that I wouldn't make any demands of a situation that doesn't have a clear shape yet, which was thoughtful, but also possibly a little bit managed." He said nothing for a moment. "Possibly," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I'm not making demands," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm a woman with a son and a job and a scholarship to coordinate and about 11 more things to figure out before I add anything else to the list. I'm not asking for anything." She paused. "But I'm also not the woman who spent 73 minutes waiting for someone who wasn't coming anymore. I know the difference between sitting alone because no one showed up and sitting with someone who showed up in a way I didn't expect." He looked at her. "I'm saying I know what happened," she said simply. "I'm saying I have enough information now to see it clearly. And I'm not closing a door based on who you were when you walked into that restaurant. I'm looking at who's sitting here." The coffee shop held them in its ordinary Saturday morning warmth. Outside the window, Mapogu was doing what the city always did, moving, producing noise, indifferent and alive. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "Yes. I was afraid of what telling you would cost." "I know." She looked at him steadily. "It cost the same either way. Telling it sooner would have cost it differently." She picked up her coffee. "I'm not offering you absolution. I'm offering you a second cup of coffee on a Saturday if you want it. That's the full extent of the offer." He looked at her. He thought about 20 years of careful distance. He thought about rules that had kept people safe and also kept him enclosed. He thought about a parking structure and a folder and documents signed in a conference room, and the slow work of becoming something that had not existed before. I have a property meeting in 40 minutes, he said. That gives you 35 minutes for the coffee. He turned to the counter and caught the attention of the person behind it and held up 2 fingers. He turned back. Amara was eating her pastry and looking at him with the expression that had been there since the restaurant. The frank, unsparing, curious appraisal of a woman who looked at things as they were rather than as she needed them to be, which was the thing about her that had been most frightening and most necessary from the beginning. "Tell me something," she said. "What?" "Something true, without management in it." He thought for a moment. Outside, a cloud shifted and the November light came through the coffee shop window at a different angle, the flat winter light that made Seoul look simultaneously old and permanent. "I used to drive the long way home," he said, "after the Shin process closed, through Mapogu. Not to come here, not to do anything. Just to drive through a neighborhood where someone I'd met was going about a normal day." He paused. "It was the closest I'd come in 20 years to wanting an ordinary thing." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked down at her pastry. "That's the least managed thing you've said to me," she said. "I've been practicing," he said. She laughed. It was the same laugh as in the park, from the chest, unguarded, the one that took the careful composure of her face apart. He had been carrying the memory of that laugh for 2 months without examining it too closely, because examining it too closely had felt like the kind of hope that preceded loss. The second coffees arrived. They drank them in the ordinary way of 2 people on a Saturday morning in a coffee shop in Mapogu, talking about things that were real without being enormous. Malcolm's schedule, the property management challenges Jae-hyun had not anticipated, a bookstore she had found near the Han River, the particular difficulty of November in a city that wasn't yours by birth but had stopped feeling borrowed. 35 minutes passed. 35 minutes passed when neither person is watching the clock. He left at the right time for his meeting. He stood up and put on his coat, and she looked up at him from the table and he said, "Thank you for the coffee." And she said, "You paid for it." And he said, "I know." And that was the whole of it. He walked out onto the November street. He stood for a moment on the sidewalk with the city around him and the cold air on his face and the particular feeling of a man who has just sat across from something that matters and has not ruined it. He walked to his meeting. Malcolm's first group exhibition was in February. It was a small show, 6 young artists, a gallery in Hongdae that specialized in youth work, an event that mattered enormously in the scale of a child's world and modestly in the scale of the city's. Amara came with her colleague from work, a Korean woman named Ji-eun, who had become the closest thing she had to a close friend in Seoul, and they stood in front of Malcolm's 3 pieces in the white-walled gallery, and Ji-eun said, "He's extraordinary," and Amara said, "I know," with the contained pride of a woman who has been telling herself this for years and still feels it new every time someone else confirms it. Malcolm stood near his work in the good shirt Amara had bought him for the occasion and received the comments of adults with the particular combination of genuine pleasure and slight embarrassment that afflicted 8 and 3/4-year-olds, soon to be 9, when their work was publicly praised. He shook hands when prompted. He answered questions about his process with the careful seriousness of someone who had thought about these things and was not accustomed to being asked. Jae-hyun arrived at 7:15. He had not known whether to come. He had been told about it, Amara had mentioned it, in the Thursday coffee that had become, over the past 2 months, a recurring feature of both their Saturday mornings without anyone making an announcement about it. And she had not said come or don't come, had simply mentioned it with the factual register of someone providing information and trusting the person across from her to make their own decision. He had stood in his apartment at 6:40 trying to decide and had decided to go. He came in quietly. The gallery was small enough that his arrival was visible, and Amara saw him from across the room with an expression that processed his presence in 2 seconds, and then moved to neutral. Not cold, not warm, just the acknowledgement of a person who has arrived and is being received without drama. He looked at Malcolm's work. The 3 pieces were large, which he hadn't expected, each one at least a meter wide, filling the white wall space with the committed force of someone for whom scale was not ambition, but necessity, because the feeling required that much room. They were all variations on the same territory he'd seen in the park sketchbook. Impossible cities, impossible geometries, small figures rendered in 4 or 5 lines that somehow carried the full weight of a human presence. The third piece was different from the others. It was darker. The cityscape replaced by something that was closer to pure texture, layers of color and line that had no representational anchor except at the very bottom, where two figures stood, barely detailed, one tall and one not, side by side in a space that could have been anywhere. He stood in front of this piece for a long time. He called it standing in it, Amara said beside him. He had not heard her approach. He turned slightly. She was standing just behind his shoulder, her arms crossed, looking at the piece with him. Did he explain the title? He said. He said it was about the feeling of being in a situation you didn't choose and deciding to be in it anyway instead of leaving. She paused. He said it was different from being stuck. He wanted to make sure I understood it was different from being stuck. Hyun looked at the two figures at the bottom of the painting, the small, rough marks that constituted them, the economy of it, the sufficiency of those few lines to communicate presence and proximity. It's the best thing in the room, he said. I know, she said. Don't tell the other parents. He turned. She was looking at him with the expression she had been giving him since November, the one that had more information in it now, more texture, built from coffee on Saturdays, and the slow accumulation of hours that were not dramatic and were not managed, and were simply time spent in the company of someone whose presence had become something he planned around without having announced the planning. You came, she said. Yes. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't either, he said. And then I was. She looked at him for a moment longer, then she turned back to the painting. Malcolm saw you come in, she said. He's been working very hard not to run over here because he's supposed to stay near his work for the opening. He should stay near his work. He knows. He's been turning around to check on you every 3 minutes. Jae-hyun looked across the gallery. Malcolm was standing in front of his first piece with two adults who were talking to him with the animated gestures of people being moved by something. He was listening with his whole body, the way he did, fully turned toward whoever was speaking, giving them his complete attention. He had a pen in his hand, uncapped, because he apparently could not exist without something to write with. As if he felt the attention, he turned his head. He found Jae-hyun across the room immediately, the directness of a child who did not perform casualness. And the grin that started at the corners arrived in full, and he raised his hand in a wave that was more a vertical bounce than a gesture. The full-body enthusiasm of someone who is trying very hard to be professional and has used up the available supply. Jae-hyun raised his hand back. Malcolm turned back to his adults. Amara beside him said nothing. He could feel her not saying something, which was its own form of statement. He's going to be something, Jae-hyun said. He already is something, she said. He's just also going to be more of it. They left the gallery at 9:30. Malcolm had been collected by Ji-eun's car with Ji-eun's 2 children, an arrangement involving a sleepover that had been negotiated through a series of text messages over the previous week, in which Malcolm had greeted with the enthusiasm of someone for whom sleepovers represented the pinnacle of social achievement. The street outside the gallery was cold, Hongdae in February at night, the particular cold of a city that does not soften its edges for the season. People moved past with their coats up and their breath visible in the air. Bars and restaurants were lit. Music came from somewhere above street level. Amara stood on the sidewalk and looked at the street. Jae-hyun stood beside her. Walk, she said. Not a question. Yes, he said. They walked. Not with a destination. The city at night had plenty of directions and none of them required justification. They walked through Hongdae and down toward the river, through streets that became quieter as the distance from the gallery increased, and the cold got into the spaces between their coats and the air, and neither of them said anything for a while. This was comfortable. That was the thing he had not expected, the first time it happened. That the silence between them was not the silence that required management, was not the silence of two people performing ease, but the actual thing. The silence of two people who had been through enough together that quiet was not absence, but presence. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. The man you were before. The one who ran the organization. She was looking at the street ahead of them. Do you miss him? He thought about this honestly, because she had asked honestly, and anything less would have been waste. Parts of him, he said. The certainty. The clarity of it. Everything was comprehensible. There was a logic to every situation, a response to every threat. The rules made sense, and following them kept people safe. And the other parts? The other parts I will not miss, he said. The distance. The way everything real had to be kept at arm's length because proximity costs too much. He paused. I was very good at keeping things at arm's length. I'm less good at it now. She was quiet for a moment. Is that difficult? Yes, he said. It's also the most alive I've been in 20 years, which is inconvenient. She made a sound that was the version of her laugh that came out when something was both funny and also entirely true. They walked. The Han River was coming up ahead of them. You could feel it before you saw it, the specific cold that came off water in winter, the slight opening of the air. I want to tell you something, she said, and I want you to hear it without managing what you do with it. Can you do that? I'll try, he said. When you walked into that gallery tonight, Malcolm turned to look the same way he would have turned if it had been his father walking in. She said it steadily, without the tremor of someone delivering something painful, but with the weight of someone delivering something true. He has never done that for anyone else in the 2.5 years we've been in Seoul. He's a perceptive child, and he has made a decision about you without announcing it, because that's how he makes decisions. She paused. I'm not telling you this as a pressure. I'm telling you this as information. Because you deserve to know what is actually happening, and because I decided a long time ago that the reason my marriage failed was that we both kept the real information in a drawer instead of on the table. He walked beside her. The river was visible now, the black winter water, the bridge lit above it, the opposite bank. I know what is actually happening, he said. Do you? Yes. He stopped walking. She stopped a step ahead and turned to face him on the riverside path. The cold was considerable. Their breath came out in the same air. I know that I have been rearranging my life around two people since the night I walked across a restaurant because a woman had been sitting alone for 73 minutes, and I recognized her stillness. He looked at her directly. I know that the legitimate reason I have property meetings in Mapogu has become indistinguishable from a reason I manufactured to be in the neighborhood. I know that every decision I have made in the past 4 months has been made by a man who is considering consequences that extend past his own life into yours and your son's. He paused. I know what is happening. I have been trying to move carefully enough that I don't damage it. She looked at him. The river moved behind her, slow and enormous and indifferent, the way it always was. You're allowed to be less careful, she said. He stood on the path above the Han River in February and looked at the woman in front of him and felt the full weight of the 20 years and the full weight of what had been cleared away to arrive at this specific cold night, this specific moment, this specific person who had looked at him since the beginning with the unsparing clarity of someone who saw things as they were and had decided with full information that what was there was worth standing in front of. He reached out and put his hand against her face, the way you did when you were checking whether something was real. She put her hand over his. She was warm. He was cold from the river air, and she was warm. I should have let you leave that restaurant, he said. You should have, she agreed. I'm glad you didn't. He dropped his hand. She kept hers on top of it for a moment before releasing it. They stood on the path with the river and the bridge lights, and the February cold, and the city's relentless ordinary noise, and neither of them said anything else for a while. Then she said, It's too cold to stand still. Yes, he said. They walked. In the months that followed, the restructuring continued its slow work. The legitimate holdings consolidated cleanly. The investment funds showed moderate returns, which was unremarkable and exactly what he wanted. The absence of the spectacular was the goal, the quiet accumulation of something that existed in the normal world and behaved normally within it. He hired people through proper channels and paid them properly and managed the work with the same focused attention he had given everything, and found that the work itself was genuinely interesting in a way he had not predicted, because the problems were real and required actual solution rather than the application of force. Park sent a message in April, brief and professional. If the legitimate holdings ever required security architecture consultation, his firm was available. Chae-hyun wrote back that he would keep it in mind. He meant it. The Choi family's attention had turned, as Jae-hyun had predicted, decisively inward. Lee Do-won's independent operations had created, in the exposure, the kind of internal disruption that occupied an organization for the better part of a year. Jae-hyun was not contacted by anyone in the Choi family during this period, which was the closest thing to resolution that situation was capable of producing. He accepted it as sufficient. He thought about Do-won occasionally, not with guilt, which would have been inaccurate, but with the specific recognition that what he had done had cost a man something significant. It was not the same as regret. He had made the only decision available. He acknowledged the cost and put it alongside the other costs in the place where those things were kept, the running account of a life that had required certain choices and was now requiring different ones. Malcolm turned 9 in March. His birthday was a small thing. Amara and Jian's children, an afternoon at a museum that Malcolm had requested specifically because it had a collection of Korean modern art he wanted to study. Hyun was not there for the afternoon. He came in the evening, after the museum and the cake, and the systematic unwrapping of art supplies, and sat at the kitchen table in Amara's apartment for the first time and drank tea she made and watched Malcolm show him each item from the supply packages with the methodical pleasure of a child cataloging treasure. "These are the good brushes," Malcolm said, holding up a set with the reverence of someone handling something precise. "They look like good brushes," Jae-hyun said. "They're the kind professionals use." Malcolm examined one. "Mom says I have to earn professional brushes, but I think I already did." "Did you tell her that?" "She laughed," Malcolm said, "but she also bought them." He looked at Jae-hyun with the direct, measuring look that Jae-hyun had come to understand was his version of taking someone's full inventory. "Do you know anything about art?" "Not much," Jae-hyun said. "I know what I respond to." "That's actually more useful," Malcolm said seriously. "Technically trained people see what's wrong. People who just respond tell you what's working." Jae-hyun looked at him. 8 months ago, he had crouched beside a park bench and looked at a sketchbook and seen something extraordinary. The extraordinary thing had not diminished. It had expanded. "Happy birthday," he said. Malcolm nodded, satisfied, and went back to his brushes. Amara, in the kitchen doorway, was looking at him with the expression that had been building for months, not the carefully neutral assessment of the restaurant or the complicated watchfulness of the safe house kitchen, but something that had settled into a different register, quieter and more certain. The expression of a woman who has taken full measure of a situation and has come to a conclusion she is not yet announcing but which informs everything. He met her eyes. She looked at him across the apartment and the evening light and her son's birthday detritus and the ordinary beautiful mess of a life that was happening, fully and imperfectly, in real time. She did not say anything. She didn't need to. He understood. There was a night in May when they stood on the roof of a building in Mapo-gu. Not his building, not hers. A building belonging to a friend of Ji-eun's who had hosted a dinner that had extended past midnight and past the dinner into the easy hours that came after, and looked at Seoul laid out in every direction beneath them. The city at night from a height had a quality that was difficult to describe precisely. All that light pressing against the darkness of the mountains and the river, the old and the new at perpetual argument, the past refusing to dissolve into the present insisting on its right to exist. It was, he thought, the most honest city he had ever known. It didn't pretend to resolution. Amara stood beside him at the railing. They had been talking about nothing in particular. The dinner, a book she was reading, something Malcolm had said that week that had been both absurd and insightful in the way of his observations. And the conversation had drifted into quiet, and the quiet had stayed. "I want to tell you something," he said. She looked at him. "I have spent a long time being the most dangerous person in any room I entered," he said. "Not because I enjoyed it. Because I had decided that if I was going to exist inside a machine I hadn't chosen, I was going to be the part of it with the most control." He looked at the city. "What I didn't understand for a long time was that control is not the same as power. Real power is being willing to be changed by something, willing to let something matter enough that it can hurt you." He paused. "I wasn't willing for a very long time." She was looking at him steadily. "I'm willing now," he said. "That's all I wanted to say. I'm not asking for anything specific. I just wanted you to know that what's happened to me since September is real, and it's not managed, and it's not going back into any drawer." The city moved below them. A plane crossed the sky to the east, its lights blinking in the dark. "I know," she said. She said it simply, without weight, because it didn't need weight. It needed only to be said. "I've known for a while. And I'm standing on this roof," she said. That's my answer. He turned to look at her. She was looking at the city, her city now, the city that had stopped feeling borrowed, with the expression of someone who has arrived fully in the place they are actually in rather than the place they came from or the place they might be going. He had walked into a restaurant in September looking for an alibi. He had found something that had no category he'd been prepared for. Not an asset, not a complication, not a civilian to be kept at a safe distance. Something that required a different vocabulary entirely. Something that had required him to become, in the space of 8 months, someone capable of using it. He looked at the city. He looked at her. "Thank you," he said. She turned from the city and looked at him. "For what?" "For not leaving the restaurant," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at Seoul, its light, its argument with itself, its refusal to resolve, and said, "I had nowhere else to be." They stood there together with the city enormous around them and the night going slowly toward morning. And it was not a fairy tale ending because it was not an ending at all. It was a position, a standing place from which things would continue in all their difficulty and imperfection and unpredictable cost. But it was real. It was his. It was the one thing the empire could never have bought him. Not with its billions, not with its fear, not with all the years of absolute unchallenged authority he had worn like a second skin. Standing in it, not stuck, standing in it. That was enough. For the first time in 20 years, it was more than enough.